Revelation 12:11. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives, even unto death.
The things that have been inflicted onto me, the things that I've inflicted onto myself, the Lord healed me completely.
All things, all beings submit to him. I could speak the name of Jesus and that evil would leave.
All I could feel was a peace and him say, "Not yet, daughter."
I called his name, and within a second, my breathing was restored and I could breathe normally again. I could not believe it.
And I saw Jesus interceding for me. And he said to me, "I've been protecting you from things you never even knew about."
Martyria. Welcome to episode 15, Kearsy's Martyria, Fighting from Victory and a Dream. Psalm 139 tells us that God knit us together in our mother's wombs. And later in the Gospels we learn that God knows the very number of hairs on our head. So how far back do God's plans go, knowing who we'll be, where we'll go, and what we'll do? Join us now as we have natural talk about Kearsy's supernatural walk.
Okay, well, buckle up. But no, so I have a background that some would consider a series of dark days. Others, unfortunately, would consider very normal. It just depends on the life that you grew up in. As a little girl, just to give you some context, I had a single mom. She had me 2 days after her 19th birthday, but the precursor to me coming into this world is important because it plays into the story later. So she met my dad at a movie theater. He worked in the film room. She worked in concessions. They ended up going to a party mutually, and she drove him home. And in the process of driving him home, I was made. And not long after that, he moves to California. That was a story that I heard. Well, my dad was a person, because he wasn't in my life most of my life, quick to anger. A lot of the trauma that he endured, he would bottle up that sadness, and the people closest to him, he would just take it out on. And so now that I understand that as an adult, it's easier to have grace, especially seeing the grace that God's given me in my life. As a little girl, that was a different story. To give you context to his personality, he told my mom that if she didn't abort me and murder me in the womb, that he was going to get her Social Security, he was going to erase her, and then he was going to have her murdered. It was just one of those things that you can see God's hand in, especially with what he's done in my life and the miracles and the things that I've seen of how the enemy tried having a hand before I was even born. And I think there's a testament to that God knitted us in our womb, and that every single one of us, he has plans and a purpose for, and he's pre-established our works, and the enemy knows that. I mean, I say that because even like people closest to my mom tried getting her to abort me, and she just said, no, I'm going to keep her. And it's important because before that even happened, God had already told my husband, basically without him knowing, who the name of his future wife was going to be. And he wouldn't find that out for 20 years later. And so mom had me. She, as a young mom, kind of just did the best she could. And my dad's side of the family were actually LDS. And he ended up leaving the LDS church and religion and movement and became Wiccan. He wasn't involved in my life until I was about 6. When he did come back, he came back with a wife who was actively in the occult. She would consider herself a white witch. The way she explained it to me was there's good witches and there's bad witches, and she's a good witch. You can love Mother Nature and you can love all those things, but I found out later that's not the truth. And I'll just say, like, kind of fast forwarding, they ended up getting like joint or shared custody. And there was one year that I lived with them in 5th grade. And during that time, my mom they both had their own pain, but in the process of their pain and managing all the tension with me and all the drama with me that they created, they would do stuff like they had a notebook, and they wouldn't even talk to each other, but they would write in the notebook and they'd stick it in my backpack and like shove me into the next car. And so, and then I'd have to take the notebook out and give it to them because they just were kind of petty in that way. And that was early 2000s. And I remember just being so frustrated with them that my stepmom, the witch, was actually the only person I had in my life. She was the only person that just sat down and let me talk and let me get to know her. So she would come out and make dinner, and then she'd make dessert, and she'd usually home make it. And during that time, we would just talk, and she wouldn't tell me everything about the craft. There were certain things that she would hold back on because she said my dad would get upset, but it was interesting to me because my dad is one of those guys, 6'2", Viking type build, covered in tattoos, loves heavy metal music, will like go on stage and would like spit blood on the crowd and think it's the coolest thing, to painting his face to look like a zombie. Like, His house was covered in, he had like Spider Zombie, I think it's Rob Zombie's little brother. Like he had autographs from him all over the wall. You had pentagrams all over the wall. You had skulls, and you had like The Crow was like one of my dad's favorite. The Crow and The Punisher were like his two favorite movies, and like morbid pictures from those all over. All of their t-shirts were band t-shirts with like zombies being eaten. Like that was just, it was a little bit more extreme version of a Halloween all the time when I was at their house. I was always grounded for things that I did at my mom's because my mom wouldn't ground me. And so like when my stepmom would pull me out, it was like, that was my safe place. Extreme stuff that happened there that I found out later, people were like, that's not normal. There was one time I got grounded and they took everything out of my room. They gave my bed to the dogs, and they put me on milk crates and a deflated air mattress. There was another time I had been at daycare. He put me in daycare at about 12 years old with my other younger brother, and I got into an argument with one of the teachers because she was being really nasty to me. We had the same name, and she said she was better than me, and I was like, well, you're the fatter one, and I told my dad about that, and I went home, and he grabbed me by the throat and he threw me up against the wall and just screamed at me for hours and hours. And then like at that point I'm tiny and he's this big guy, so him like lightly shoving me was enough to like propel me forward. That was one of the times that led to abuse charges, like me getting pushed down the stairs or him like spitting on me or screaming for hours. Multiple times where he would just pick me up by my throat and yell at me. And then when I would tell my stepmom about it, he would come and tell me I was the seed whore like my mom, and just not a fun relationship. And so I think at that time I wanted power. I wanted power so much. And I had a book that my stepmom had given me called Magique, and I have a really hard time finding it on the internet. But in this book, Magique, it was a fantasy book. However, at the end there was spells. I was so infatuated with Poison Ivy from like the old school Batmans at that time. And I think like Sky High, the girl that could control plants and stuff. But I just wanted to be able to control something. And in the back of this book, there was a spell to control snakes. That if you did this spell, you could control whatever serpent or snake you wanted to. And that I thought it was like Disney Channel. Like I'd be able to be like, oh, move around. So I did this spell and didn't think anything of it. And then I started playing with other stuff. It got to the point that I started other things. I was really obsessed with Twilight around that time. Because I'm in 5th, 6th grade, I would hide myself in the books. And I remember I was like, what if I could just live forever? Because then I could just control everything that happens. And I was so curious for life. I was like, I could be a lawyer, I could be a doctor, I could be an actor. Like, I could do all the things that I ever wanted to do, and I wouldn't be throttled by one lifetime. So if I could just live forever, that would be really cool. And I had this idea that if I wanted to be like the Cullens, all I had to do was sell my soul to Satan. Like it was just normal. Like that's totally fine. I could go get it from him. And that maybe he'd give me super cool giftings. And I laugh now that God's shown me that that was the way that my brain was thinking, because that's what he gives all of us. When we come to him, not only does he make us a new creation, but he gives us a new life. And as we walk and choose to step into that, and we choose to let him be the author and give him that access to penmanship, he's the one that decides what our gifts are. And then that's just on this side of heaven. Once we get on the other side of heaven, we have eternity with him. And that's without sin, that's without shame, that's without depression, like all of these things that we try to escape here on the earth. And I laugh because, I mean, God obviously got me and saved me out of that. But at 11, 12 years old, I'm on Google, like, how do I sell my soul so that I can live forever? And it's like, if someone would have just told me, if someone would have just been like, there's a better version over here. That's important because about that time, I started just going down the rabbit hole. I was arrested for the first time between the ages of 11 to 17. I had 31 bookings in juvenile detention center. I had several bookings into the local mental institution, and there was just an understanding that in my community that I was going to end up dead in a ditch with a needle in my arm. People did not expect me to have the testimony and the breakthrough that I did. Even like this week, I had someone from my past reach out, and he's like, we were really wondering what happened to you. And then we kind of figured it out just because I'm open about talking about my faith, and which is beautiful. But so to give you context about the mental health docket, it's a program that is like drug court. And for those that don't know what drug court is, it's, I'll just go with the juvenile mental health docket. You have 4 phases in order to get out of this program. It was this or what they would consider a juvenile prison. And so a juvenile prison would be you're sent to southern Idaho, because I'm from Idaho, and you just get to be there until you earn your way out. And then once you get out of there, ideally you go through a program similar to the docket, but what they would call on the outs. And instead of going to commitment, I went straight to this program. They no longer have the program. It was extremely expensive, and they weren't forcing the turnaround they wanted to. But at the time, I just remember my probation officer standing up and telling the judge, Kearsy is not a bad person. She's not, she just has a really bad home life, and her mom need to go through this. Because my mom and I were just like oil and water, constantly raging at each other. She'd call the cops on me anytime she got, like, I went to jail one time for not doing the dishes. I went to jail for another time. One of the neighborhood girls, she could tell me how to load a meth pipe, and she's 7 or 8 years old, and I said the F word in front of her, and they were like, well, you're getting arrested for cussing in front of a kid, so we're going to take you. And there was one time my mom and I, because we were so toxic, I sat out on the roof and was hiding from her because I was the only place she would not go because she was terrified to go up there, and just I could breathe. And I remember she called the cops and told them I was threatening to jump and commit suicide. And that was before I had ever had any suicidal ideation. So the cops came and took me, and they arrested me and put me in I was too young for jail at the time, so they put me in the local mental institution. And then there was another time I got arrested for throwing a pillow at her, and they put me in the local mental institution. And I didn't stay in that one. I didn't stay there long that time. When the nurses found out, they kind of did some digging and found out that's actually what happened, and that there was actually other kids that were waiting in the ER needing the bed that I was in, so they let me leave. But that was kind of like my childhood. And so when I got into the docket, it was 27 hours of therapy a week. I had MRT, I had drug counseling, I had wraparound services. I didn't even do drugs before I got into all this stuff. I actually started smoking weed on probation, I mean, ironically. But it was a lot. It was super intensive. I did really good during the docket time. And I mean, you had community service. You had to earn your way up a level. They didn't tell you, you've got a year in this, you've got a year and a half. You have to earn your way out. I ended up being the first graduate. And I think what contributed to that is I had a really good team. I had a really good probation officer. Her and I had started this program called Equine Therapy for local juvenile detention kids. And so what they would do is we would go out to a farm. We would work on this farm for about an hour and a half, whether that was helping with fence, or it was helping move pellets, or it was helping pull rocks out of the arena. And then the last hour and a half, we would learn how to ride horses, maintain horses, brush them, all those things. And that was just really special to me. I saw that there was some giftings in me at that point, where I really liked the project management side of it. I liked being a part of something that I could see the fruits of, and that were blessing other people, even though I wouldn't have had the words for it at that time because I still wasn't Christian. I still was a deeply bitter and angry person. I was probably more passive aggressive. Other fights or other things that I got in trouble for around that time, because I'm now about 16, 17, is I would get in fist fights. I would instigate fist fights with other girls and then record it. I got in trouble for having cigarettes. Like, I was a rebellion, and my mom didn't really care to like hold the reins in, and there wasn't a relationship to do it. So she would let me do whatever I wanted. And then I would go to my dad's and I would be grounded there up until about 12 or 13. He disowned me because he said I was too much like my mom. And I think that was one of the better things that happened to me in my life. It was hard at the time because I didn't understand it, but it saved me a lot more pain and anguish. And so, I mean, fast forward, I'm 16, I've graduated the mental health docket. Mom then kind of kicked me out, but that wasn't unprovoked. I was trying to get out of her house because her and I just were so bad for each other at that time. It's not like that anymore, obviously, but it was really rough. And so I moved in with my high school sweetheart, and then him and I ended up getting an apartment together. He ended up actually proposing to me, and he's like the other main person that was in my life. And around this time at 16, I was going to a local high school, and the teacher he didn't get arrested till I was 18, but he was molesting his kids. And I was kind of the person that announced it to the public indirectly. And the reason that happened was my mom had a friend who was dating this new girl, and she asked me to babysit for her. So she brought her kids over, and some things happened with these kids. And I reported it to her, and I was like, hey, like, these are some really suspicious, not okay things that I'm seeing. And she's like, I know, her dad works with the government. I'm trying to like figure out something. I'm getting him in counseling to see, because she's like, I see it, I know it, but I need to make sure a counselor like goes through this and talks about this, so that I'm not just doing it in my own strength, or I'm not forcing anything in my kids' mouths. And so I was like, oh, okay, like that's encouraging, and like also a bummer that I did, because in my mind, like the government, even though I was in the government all the time and I was kind of a slave to it, I didn't realize like it would be considered to protect someone that is like that. So I remember being a little bit tripped up by that, and I was going to an alternative school at the time. I went to school the next day, and my friend was there, and I was telling her about that, and we're sitting in our computer class, and I'm just like, I can't believe like this happened, and this is what happened. It was just awful. And we get up, and in our computer class, this was like at the beginning of screen sharing, so it was really cool, is that you could access any of the other screens in the classroom from the computer's main desk. And I remember like we would go up there, different students would go up there and they would go and grab on the computer and they would change the keys around, or they would turn someone's screen upside down and they would just play jokes. And so I went up to that computer and I went to go do that. The kids that I babysat the night before were on that computer screen. And I remember just turning like super pale and white. And my friend was like, well, what happened? I was like, these are the kids I was watching last night. And the teacher comes up and he is the most beloved, charismatic, everyone's favorite teacher. And I was like, hey, like, whose kids are these? And he's like, oh, they're mine. And I was like, maybe I could watch them sometime. Just kind of like played it off super quiet because he had no idea that I just babysat his kids for his ex-wife. Well, my friend had told everyone in my 300 member high school by lunch. So it came to this thing like I'm now not even a Christian yet, but I'm now forced to. I have to double down and walk in truth and choose to, am I going to fight this fight as a young kid or not? It got so bad. You could see which faculty were involved in the no and which ones weren't, because like I had certain teachers that had no idea what was going on and they treated me with respect and they let me do my work. Other teachers wouldn't even let me do my work. This teacher specifically, like he would walk by me in another class that I had him with and he would just look at me and then like walk past me, like, you don't need your work today, and give it to the next people. He would often say like I was making up stuff for his psycho wife. And fast forward, I ended up dropping out of school the day I turned 16 because I was like, there's no reason for this. Like anything between this grade and senior level isn't really anything that I need to be productive in the workplace. Like I'm fine, I'm leaving. And I told the principal that. The principal was kind of in a situation where the school had just went through a rebrand to not be considered an alternative school. And now their number one staff member is being accused of pedophilia. And it's on the mouth of a student that they may or may not know. So he was in a really hard position. And I kind of just phrased it to him as this is going to happen. And I want to go to these classes. And that's what's going to set me up for success. And your job's to set me up for success. So let me go to these classes. And he decided to let me do that. The semester ended like actually on my birthday. So I ended up leaving. I go into the workforce. I'm now 16 at this point, have left the mental health docket, left school. I'm in the workforce. And I kind of got this bent of freedom. And that's when I really started experimenting with drugs. We had some roommates. One person had one of my fiance's coworkers had just had someone move in from the East Coast, and he was super into drugs, and he was casual about it, but they really did like they would kind of celebrate anything and do any type of level of drugs that they could, but they would try to start with maybe they might smoke weed with you, but then they would slightly edge up to acid. And if they could, they would try to get coke, or they try to do shrooms. And I never got as like extreme as doing coke or shrooms, but there was one night that we all got together and we did acid, and the acid that they got from somebody was not direct acid. It was cut. They called it like ICP. So instead of tripping for just a little bit, it was like a 15-hour trip. And I just remember I think I was 16 or 17, so in between that age, but I just remember that. And then on top of that, we're just guzzling as much alcohol as we can. I just remember it was really intense. And I remember I didn't have as many out-of-body experiences as other people did, but it was one of those things that we were dumb and walked to a nearby grocery store. And I remember just seeing like things turn into animals and stuff. And so I didn't have any interactions with drugs in that case. And I think the reason that it didn't happen is I was already being tormented by demons constantly, and didn't even realize that.
Quick question. This is so random, but I was curious, when you were in the juvenile docket, you'd mentioned kind of starting the equestrian or the equine program. Well, did you have a history with horses, or was that just you thought that'd be like horse therapy sounds cool, let's do that, or how'd that get going?
No. So I was sitting in a CPS person's office, and they were like, well, you need to do something because you've got gifts and there's too much going on with you, and you can't go smoke weed. You can't go get in fights. You can't go do stuff. So you need to figure out something. And I was like, well, I want to go into karate, or I want to go into martial arts or something. And they're like, no, try again. And I was like, well, is there like archery? And they're like, no, try again. I was like, is there anything with like horses? And they're like, well, we can find something. And so I think the CPS person got in touch with my probation officer, and I also had a PSR, which is psychosocial rehabilitation, and a counselor on wheels. You go do stuff with them. And somewhere in the mix, someone got a hold of a local farm, and her name was Diana. And Diana, super talented woman, was like, yeah, well, we can start this. And it's still alive today. It's still something that they do today. And I think a lot of kids look forward to it. I think the farm that they use or the ranch that they use has changed, but yeah, it was, that's how it started.
Yeah, I just randomly. So I grew up in a very country town myself. The town itself has 1,200 people. So when you say a school of 300, I resonate. My graduating class was like less or just at 60 students. So very very small. News travels very fast. But one of the best things for the students, if they're bored, then unfortunately a lot of them turn to drugs, alcohol as well. But one of the best things for them is the fact that it's a farm town. So, you go and you do some work and that keeps you occupied and you get stuff done. And, so there's a lot of, I think, unspoken benefit to that. You had mentioned, that God knows the plans and he like knit you in the womb and everything like that. That word though, for knit you in the womb, the word, I think it's cassette. It's like QASAT or something like that. I'm probably pronouncing it in a very like bad way. I'm not a Hebrew major by any means, but that word knit, it can also mean shield, which I find very, very interesting. So like it's not only that God is creating you, right? Like knitting you together, but there's intention behind it, right? The idea that it's not that he's creating you, but he's protecting you or setting you up for purpose. I mean, if you really want to kind of stretch it, but still that idea of like him creating you, there is purpose and intent just in the very creation of your being. And I find that to be very, very fascinating. And um having a father myself who is fairly aggressive and not very involved in a lot of ways, um it's interesting now to think about how many things even we do now, because it's a very human thing, but how many decisions we make out of brokenness, and how strong those decisions come across, and especially as a child. I mean, I've had my own share of run-ins with my dad before my parents got divorced. I remember a softball being lodged into the wall halfway, like right next to my face, and I didn't know that my dad was angry. He just walked up to the door to my room, and all of a sudden I like moved my head and there's a softball in the wall. I just like so looking back now on my own situation and hearing about your situation, it's no excuse for anybody because that's not right to do to anybody, but it's interesting to see how many decisions we make from a place of brokenness. And oftentimes when we make decisions from brokenness, the decisions lead to breaking other people, right? It's almost like brokenness is almost like a magnet in that way, right? And so your dad is doing a lot of terrible things, right? And your stepmom is letting those things happen, and then you become broken from his brokenness, from her brokenness, from your mother's brokenness, right? Like it's interesting to see how the decisions that we make, especially as children, oftentimes feel out of our hands, or like you'd mentioned, even out of our control. And so what do? We want control. Well, what is our example of control? Getting grabbed by the throat and slammed into the wall, or having someone just randomly throw a projectile at you and you're not expecting it, or whatever that looked like. Then all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a second, I need control because this is how I recognize authority. This is what I see as that. And I'm curious, I know you were talking about this book Magique, and it was just kind of this fantasy novel, but at the end there were some actual spells. Did you ever try to like control snakes, or did you have any success with any of those spells?
Not in a physical sense. And so I will get to that because that's important for later on in the story. I didn't realize what I had did and the dangers of that book and that spell for about a decade, like about 2-3 years ago. And I've been a Christian for close to 10 years. So it didn't. I guess in short, I'll just tell you is I got possessed. I don't know if possession is the right word, but I got tormented by demons and I needed a very out of body, visceral deliverance experience. Like somebody had to physically pull the demons out of me. The demons manifested. It was, I actually started a podcast called The Curious, doing very similar to what you do, is I just interviewed people around me, and I had so many big dreams and big goals for that podcast. And, God used it to heal me. One of the people that I interviewed, and you can see it in my face as you go through the interviews, is like the stronger the Christian was, I started manifesting demons. And it was like I would start growling, my lips would start quivering. And it was so weird because I have like, and I'll get more to my story later, is I have this supernatural encounter with God time and time again. And I've seen these beautiful things like to the way that I met my husband. And yet I still have manic thoughts. I'm still like, I thought just maybe like, oh, no, I can control the manic or I can control the things. They have a saying like they have manic eyes. I don't believe it's manic eyes. I think it's when a demon's manifesting in somebody. But like, it was interesting because I have moved from my hometown, and the people that I was interviewing were in my hometown, and they were part of a non-denominational Pentecostal leaning church. And one of the things that they were starting to do as a church was they were starting to bring deliverance in, and people were getting radically healed and demons were getting cast out. And that's become more of a conversation in American culture where it necessarily wasn't not so long ago. And it was interesting because as I was interviewing the pastor, I kind of got a little bit about it. And then I got someone she grew up as a mission kid in South Sudan. She's an amazing woman. She came on and I started like growling. And then one of my really good friends came on, and I've known her since before like my BC era, like before Christ. She was one of the people I got in trouble with, like, because she was Christian, she left the faith. I met her while she was deconstructing, and then I came to the faith, and then she came back to the faith, and it was just, we kind of met up when she came back to the faith. And she's now like, she's a third generation Christian, where I'm a first generation, and she's now doing a deliverance ministry, and she kind of does that on the side. And I remember when she got on, there was like warfare around my life. Is like, in order for me to interview her, in order for me to, I had obsessions and compulsions it was almost like the enemy was roaring really loud because he was terrified. Like there was something known that I didn't know, but like I started getting obsessive compulsive about this thing that would have, if I went and did that thing, which was I'm not a materialistic person, but I was obsessed with, I need to go buy this thing. And I was like, if I go buy this thing, even though I don't have the money for it, or I have to do it. And I ended up not doing it. And I just kind of like put that cross down. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go do that. If I went and bought that thing, I wouldn't have had that interview. And when I had that interview, it was just like, you can see me I look like I'm on drugs because I'm just like tilting back and forth. Like I just hear like these snarls coming out. And by the end of the interview, she turned it off. I was like, I need deliverance. I'm so sorry. Like, this is about your testimony. This is about you. But like, you're the only person I know to go to. Like, I'm tired of it. And 3 hours later, me slightly like levitating my, the demon as she was casting it out, it was multiple demons. It was a python spirit. It called itself, I don't even want to give it its name. It doesn't deserve a name, but it spoke out of me. And when a lot of people hear like, how did a demon speak out of you? Well, and especially as a Christian too, because there's this like tension. Well, once you're saved, you can't have a demon in you. And that was my understanding, is like, I'm saved by everything. But what I didn't realize is that I still dabbled back in the occult after I became a Christian. So in my own experience, I was still being tormented. And it was interesting is like, when in my walk with these demons that I didn't, and once I had identified them, the intrusive thoughts changed. It went from like, oh, you should pick up this thing and do this awful thing to this person, to you're a bleep, 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 and this constant curse and this slander. And I was like, whoa. And like the cadence and the voice changed. And once I had called it out and I was ready to wage war, and I started fasting and I started praying, that fasting and prayer led me up to meeting this friend. And when she pulled those things out, man, like just one of the things they were asked was, because all of it's on camera, is like, one of the things they were asked is, where did you come from, or how did you come in? And I had to go through and I had to renounce, and I had to break covenants. And one of the covenants and renouncements I had to give was I had to renounce those spells I did from that book when I was 11 years old. And it's interesting because I did this spell to attract snakes, and I was full of serpent spirits. And so it was something that I thought was going to be harmless, and I thought was going to be easy, and this thing like I was going to be able to control them like Disney Channel. And yet they came in and they started tormenting me. And after that happened, I actually stopped doing the podcast, not because I don't want to go back to it any day, but I needed to heal personally, because it was violating. Like, the best way that I can explain it is, after I had gotten deliverance, it felt like I had just been inside a cave, like it covered in mud and covered in shackles for years. And I just took my first breath of fresh air and was seeing the light of day. And I felt breakthrough and I felt release, but it was a different level of breakthrough and release. And I went through this phase after of getting deliverance of everyone's glamming up deliverance, and they're showing these demons coming out, and they're showing these demons growling and screaming at people. But what does the healing look like? Like, I'm a Christian. Like, I know my Bible. I know my stuff. But like, how do I find healing in this? And God in his goodness, one of the people I interviewed in this podcast, she the one that was from South Sudan, she talked about healing after deliverance. And so I was able to find a little bit from her. And one of the things that I found was that it's so tempting to look around every corner and be like, is there a demon there? Is there a demon? Did I open this door? And that's when you start getting legalistic. And that's when you try to start forcing things in, when really we have authority in the spirit, and we have this a lot of people don't understand the revelation of authority, but when God's given us dominion in a place, it's not warfare. It's us asserting our dominion and being able to reclaim what he's given us in the spirit, and which is separate than intercessory. Intercessory is where it's not our dominion, it's not our place of authority. And like, for example, I can't just go up to a random stranger on the side of the road and start casting out a spirit, because that's not my dominion and authority. I can intercede on their behalf, and I can petition heaven to come in and intercede. But in my own life, if I see a door opened and I haven't repented and I start seeing things, like, I can repent of that and I can claim authority. This is my home or my children or my life, and you no longer have a hold on my finances or whatever it is. Like, and I have that freedom to walk in that. But in my naivety, I opened up the door to those demons. And also, like, on the other end of it is, even though I was 11 or 12, God had grace with me, because after becoming a Christian, one of the things that I did is I was like traveling up and down the West Coast, and I stopped in California and I went and saw a psychic. I was actually with another friend who was a really strong Christian, and I didn't know that psychics were bad because I was just raised by a witch. And so I just thought that was normal. And we walked in, and I gave her money as a Christian to look into my life from an occultic perspective, and not really understanding the warfare, because the church I went to, I was baptized at a Southern Baptist church, and they just don't talk about that stuff. Like, that's not something that they bring up. It's not evident for a new believer. You just need to know who Jesus is. And I was only a Christian for about a year at that time. And I remember going into the psychic's office, and the friend that was with me that was a strong Christian, she made leave the room when she did my reading and talked to me. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. I think of it as a concern now, because she would have been able to stand in authority on behalf of me because she had that permission. But one of the things that this psychic did was she called out some things in my life, and then I gave her some money. I think I gave her like $300, and I've had to repent of that because I've had issues with finances since then. But I gave her this money, and then I went back to the hostel, and I remember being at this hostel, and I'm sitting in the back and just smoking weed like a chimney. It wasn't the best thing, but I still needed to surrender that. I hadn't surrendered that yet in my life. And I remember being there, and I just felt like a truck just hit me, and it was like, this is going to sound completely wild, but it was an out-of-body experience in a way that as I was sitting there, I felt a mingle in my spirit. And it was just like a truck hit me. I felt a mingle, and it just shot me down to the point like I needed to grab down and sit down. And I was like, something just came in me, and it's not good. And I instantly had fear come over me, and not like a godly fear, but like I'm terrified. And one of the things the psychic told me to do as a ritual is I need to go into water, and I need to be around water, and I need to pray. And I need to pray to whatever my God is. And I instantly started thinking of Mary Magdalene and how she had several demons cast out of her. And I just remember grabbing my Bible and like throwing open my Bible in this, because we were in a hostel. So like it was they have all these little bathrooms that are shared. I remember like throwing my Bible on the sink and like getting in the shower, and I was just like, God, like, please, 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 like, protect me. Like, don't let this happen, blah, 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 blah. And like, you protected Mary. And so I just kept praying over and over. Well, I was terrified that if he cast this demon out, not having any understanding what deliverance was, and this is a couple of years before I got deliverance from this during the podcast time, I was terrified that it was going to be like the pigs, and that this demon was going to come out and it was going to go into the nearest thing. And the nearest thing was the friend that was with me. She was one of the most precious people, like saved herself for marriage, like amazing woman. And I was so terrified that these demons were going to go and torment her. So I didn't fully let them be released. Couple months later, I'm in a different town. I'm in a different city. And I just had gone through a bunch of really difficult stuff that I talk about in my book. And I'm driving down a hill, and I'm just so angry at God. Like, the whole Job situation is like, why would you allow good things or bad things happen to those you love? Like, how are you a good God if that happens? And I remember I'm going like 40, 50 miles an hour, and I just start speeding up because I'm just hysterical, like frustrated that I can't feel any emotion, frustrated that God would do this. Why am I following this God? And I just, as I'm like going faster and faster, I just feel this sudden like feeling in me, and then it's like worms coming out of my heart. Like, that was the vision that I had, just these worms like slithering up and out and just dropping out of me. And it was painful. It felt like a sword had just like broken into me, like cut me open, and these things just started coming out. And I'm still driving, mind you, on a highway. And so I like scream, and then I open my eyes. I'm like, thank God I didn't like drive off the side of the road. And I look up, and I take a breath, and then all of the slander wants to come out. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you would do, just angry at God. But they say, take your emotions to God. And as I'm speeding and I'm going like to the end of this highway where you kind of get to city limits, so it's like right before you hit city, he's like, are you ready to listen? Like, I just heard a still small voice in the back of my mind, which was completely like left field for what I'm explaining that I'm experiencing. And I just hear like, I'm like, okay, God, like, what do you have for me? And at that point, it was a healthy fear. At that point, it was like a fatherly, like, we're going to talk because you obviously have got some stuff going on. And I was just like, okay, God, like, what do you have for me? And I'm going to back up. What actually, I messed up on the timing. So right before he said, are you ready to listen? And I started slandering him right before I dropped the F-bomb. And because I was still getting a hold of my tongue at that time, right before I dropped the F-bomb, I looked over and a woman was passing me. So like her car was passing mine. And that's when I was slowing down. She looked up and she went like this. And that's when I felt the fear come over me. And it was like a do not open your mouth and do not say something, like watch your mouth, basically, in a very kind way. And she might have just been driving and not realized what she just did. But at that point, that's when I heard, are you ready to listen? And I was like, yeah. And he said, the reason that there is evil in this world is because there is free will. And it's like, it's the potential of evil is why we have free will, but that's the very thing that God wants us to have. And it just made complete sense to me, is that there is hard things that happen to us and dark things that happen to us. And I didn't realize until several years later, after I had just gone through this first deliverance journey that I told you about, that was one of the first forms of deliverance that I received aside from my baptism. Because the day before I was baptized, I actually went and abandoned all my crystals and all the stuff that I was doing in the occult. And I don't think a lot of people talk about the demonic side because it's uncomfortable, or it's in the unknown, or it's unseen. And when it's hard to touch on things that aren't fully in scripture, but a large majority of the New Testament is casting out demons. The disciples were still casting out demons. Jesus was going around and killing the sick, and he was casting out demons. And so it's one of those things that I think there's still mental illness in this world. And I think that I'm someone that is able to talk on this because I went through the mental health docket. I was in and out of a lot of counseling and rehabilitation centers. They did testing on me with medications. Some of those medications I quit cold turkey and led to a suicide attempt, like that did hospitalize me. Like I've seen a lot of the mental health world, and I can tell you from the time that I got deliverance, all of that thing went away. There's no more, like, before my last deliverance, I didn't really struggle with manic thoughts a whole lot, but I had intrusive thoughts a lot. And once I got deliverance, no more intrusive thoughts, no more like looking in the mirror and not seeing who I was and feeling like a fool. No, just staring off into distance and feeling like I'm fully in control and not knowing what's going on. Like, I had complete surrendered freedom in that point, and that came because of, it was like, so I'll explain this. So before I was Christian, I would just say things and I couldn't control my mouth. And it was like a lie just came out of my mouth and I would be like, uh-oh, like that just came out, like terrified. And then once I became a Christian, it was like a sneeze. I could control this sneeze. It wasn't a sneeze that was going to come out that I couldn't control, but if I let that sneeze come out, it was going to say and do whatever it wanted. And until I had walked through deliverance, I hadn't been able to identify that that's really what it was. So even as I was going through the deliverance process, I had to fully give it permission to speak or to go through things. And that was a difference of like having this oppression before Christ and after Christ in my life. And so to go back to the question that you asked is, what happened with that spell that I did, it opened up my soul to being tormented by demons. And it didn't help that my grandmother's a prostitute and was a witch herself. So I had witchcraft and the occult from both sides of my bloodline. And I ended up being on the one side of it where thankfully God's made me a chain breaker. And he, like you said, he knit me with purpose and as a shield. And so I'm like, okay, well, obviously there's freedom here and I don't mind speaking on it, but a lot of people can get hesitant, or even in the early days, I wasn't as well versed as I can be, and I didn't communicate as well as I can now. And so a lot of people looked at me like I was just psycho. And now that you're seeing like pages come out where there's thousands of videos of this kind of stuff, it makes a little more sense. But yeah, that's kind of the what happened later.
Yeah.
And
When you were a practicing witch, did you do any sort of like divination or like fortune telling, or have any sort of visions of things that were going to happen to other people or to yourself in the future at all?
so I have a prophetic gifting, and that's a gifting that God has given me. But again, the enemy is a ripoff of stuff. And I want to say, like, being a prophet and having the office of a prophet is different than prophetic prophesying or exhortation, like, over somebody, or being prophetic in nature. There's different elements to that and layers to that, but having a prophetic gifting or having that extreme amount of discernment and looking at someone and knowing things is something that has only been magnified since I became a Christian, and God's shown me that that was originally from him. But the enemy trying to knock that off and giving me powers was I would look at people and I would just know things about them, or I would see things, or those kind of things. And so one of the things that I didn't need to sit down with tarot cards. I never really got into tarot cards. I didn't need to sit down with tarot cards to know things about people or to say things about people. I could meet somebody and I could know exactly what they wanted, and I could almost sync up with them. And it,
Yeah, so the reason that I'm asking, and I'll say that it's a prompting from the Holy Spirit, but I think it's also just being a little bit more aware of some things in the New Testament. Like you said, there's a lot of casting demons out. Well, in the book of Acts, there's the girl who has the spirit of divination.
mm,
Well, the actual Greek for that is pneuma for spirit and python for divination. And so
yeah.
you say you had a spirit, a python spirit in you. You're not the first person who I've talked to who's mentioned that, and they too had that same sort of, ability, we'll say, quote unquote, to be able to just see things and know things. And so just very interesting.
You know what it was is like when I was trying to find the words for it, when I would go up along someone, I almost felt like a snake charmer. The way that a snake charmer could, like, into a snake, it was like I could do that to other people while I was walking in that. It's been interesting because I have, on this side of deliverance, seen a lot of people that have prophetic giftings do get tempted with a portho or python or a portho spirit. And one of the things that it was like that is I could go up to someone and I could see it, but I can look back now and I can see that it was a demon. And even when one of the really big things that started the process of me thinking, like, there's something not right here, and I do need to get these demons cast out and consult this friend, was my second was born, and he was in the NICU. We were in there for about 16 days, and I had gotten this book because at the time God was convicting me of, this is something we'll kind of get into a little later. I got into the OnlyFans industry before it was OnlyFans. It was called camming, and I had made a character and I had made a persona, but I had chosen to be promiscuous. I now know that some of that choice might have been demonically driven, but it doesn't make an excuse. Like, I still made the choices, I still made the decisions, and both before being a Christian and after being a Christian, but after being a Christian, always trying to do the right thing and still succumbing to these temptations. But once I had met my husband, like, it was all off at that point, and I was now a couple years into our marriage, and I was convicted of, like, God, I want to be right. I want to be pure. Like, I wasn't trafficked in a sense that, like, I had a pimp and someone that was forcing me to gossip. Was I coerced, and were there, like, characters at play? Yes, but I chose this, and I couldn't find anything on the market for people that had chose to be promiscuous, that had chose to go out and do this, except for there was one post I found, like, on an offsite of the internet, and it ended up being from a woman named Paula Reinhart, who is she started her counseling journey just as a regular counselor, but she found God was sending her people often that had some sort of sexual trauma or were in prostitution, or, like, all walks that come with that world. And she ended up writing a book called Sex and Soul. And in this book, it is over, like, basically walking through the pain of regret. It is a beautifully done book, especially whether you have been promiscuous your life, you've been trafficked, or you've only been with one partner. Like, it's one of those things that completely just heals that side of your heart and that side of your soul. And you'll read through the book. She said, like, she writes in the book how it was only supposed to be a quick little letter for her clients, and it quickly turned into a book. But at the end of each chapter, there is very thought-provoking questions. And one of the things, I don't remember if it was in the book or I was just inspired by it as I'm sitting in the NICU with my son, was I need to renounce every partner that I've had, and I need to ask God to, like, break that soul tie. And I remember sitting in the NICU on the chair, my son's, like, over by me, and I'm writing down every partner I have, and I'm just speaking their name, the relationship, I'm renouncing it, and I'm surrendering it to God, and just breaking any soul tie verbally that needs to be broken. And I felt something come up and out of me, and it was like this, and I felt it just, like, looking at me. Like, I felt the slithering, and it almost reminded me of, like, I don't know if you've seen Rhea, but, like, the green dragon in Rhea, how it constantly moves like that. It looked like that, and as it slithered and moved, and then it just, like, I felt like it looked at me and it looked at my son and it looked at me. I couldn't see it visually, but it was like I could see it. Like that's the best way that I can describe it is, but it did that. It looked at me, looked at my son. And then I just felt this like disgust. And so I kept renouncing him. I kept renouncing every single person that I was with. Well, one of the people that I had been with in my past, he was Native American. He was the second under the tribe leader, and his dad was actively in it. His family was Christian, but he had walked away from it, and I'm pretty sure he had gotten into stuff. And it was his name and another name that I came on to. And when I spoke their name and renounced that, that's when the spirit manifested. And it was enough for me that started a multiple journey thing where I was like, okay, like I'm ready to get deliverance. I'm ready to get out of this. But it was, again, like a Python type spirit.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it from outside of knowing the Pneuma Python, but I do think it's very interesting that the very first record we have of temptation, right, in the garden inside of Eden is from a Nachash, right, a serpent,
A serpent.
and
Yep.
the serpent, that word nakash has a lot of meaning behind it outside of serpent, like the idea of it being shining or bronzed or having a supernatural knowledge that we don't have, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things to lure anyone into something like that, and we see the imagery of serpents all throughout history from all types of pagan religions, from all types of people groups. Like we'll go discover some archaeological dig, and you kind of flip a coin and you're going to find an image of a serpent somewhere, right? It's just it's pervasive. And even things like the Chinese zodiac have a dragon as part of their representation. I mean, it's literally all over the place. The idea of the Ouroboros is like this serpent that's continuing, you know what I'm saying? Like this idea of something that is just so prevalent. It's almost, to me, it's almost as prevalent as other religions taking and finding a way to fold Jesus in, where it's like, okay, there's something very important about Jesus, so we're going to fold him in. But then all these other religions are like, well, there's also something about this serpent, and we have to have this serpent be part of what it is that we're doing. And so, we see the same thing that God said to Eve, right? You're going to continue to be at enmity with the serpent and its offspring, and my offspring will, be at odds until ultimately, my son defeats the serpent, right? It's just very interesting.
Yeah, well, and I'm actually looking up. There was a verse in Romans, and it was about you will crush the serpents under you. And I remember, I'm just gonna look it up so I don't have to flip through my Bible. I think it was Romans 16:20, which says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus will be with you. And I think that there's a verse or translation of like serpent. And I just kept saying that over and over and over leading up to that deliverance time period, because it's like there is enmity, but also we fight from victory, not for victory as Christians. And one of the things that I've found a lot of comfort in is, if God had let me go through that deliverance journey early on as a Christian, as embarrassing as I did and as much situations I ended up in that weren't the most endearing for me, I don't think I would be as strong of a Christian. But instead, he established my love and my walk with him so that when that time did come, knowing that I would be in the place that I was and needed what I needed at the time that I went through deliverance, I was fully prepared, and I didn't question who he was and what his authority was in my life or what authority he had in the spirit realm. And so I found peace in that, and I found peace and full confidence that I fight from victory, not for victory. And I don't need to go rounds, because like demons they like to be hidden. And as soon as they are called out, demons like to be hidden. And the first thing that they'll do when they're called out is they'll start to curse and they'll start to slander, or they'll pretend to leave and they don't leave. And then there may need to be more deliverance or multiple times of deliverance. But I have found the biggest thing that separates someone from being able to be fully delivered and be fully free, not like fully free, because you can still have God as Lord and you can still be very well meaning. Oftentimes in some of the deliverance ministry videos I see, they're Christian, they love Jesus, they're walking with him, but they're still oppressed. And forgiveness is the number one thing. There's a verse, or someone talks about it, I've heard people talk about it quite often, but this verse is that essentially, like, we know the prayer, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heavens, forgive us as we forgiven our debtors. But there's another terminology or verse that people refer to in context, and it's like, you'll be given over the tormentors if you don't forgive. And it's not necessarily God saying, oh, you didn't forgive me, like, you be punished. It's more, there's spiritual laws in place in the world and the time that we live in on this side of heaven, and the enemy isn't a lawyer. Like, he's very legalistic. He can use things and he can say, well, this person said this or this person did this. They never repented. They didn't forgive as you forgive. So let me go and do this to them. And God can say, well, until you go and take that to the courts, until you go and renounce it, and one of those things is forgiveness, is like, you need to forgive those around you. And forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. That was something that I had to come to terms with, but it was one of the big pivotal things that shut that door from them being able to come back in. Because for me, I did this spell to attract serpents, not realizing that I was attracting serpent spirits, and that door stayed open because I was trying to get power over somebody that had done me wrong and wanted to prove other people that I was this powerful person, instead of just forgiving them and surrendering. And so that lack of forgiveness is essentially the deception that the enemy used. And at such a young age, I was like 11 or 12, but it's the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet, and the grace of our Lord Jesus will be with you. That's the freedom in it.
Yeah. So a couple things that I find quite interesting in regards to that, and I'd actually never thought about this with in regards to the Lord's Prayer, and I'd certainly have to do a little bit more research before I could say I'm confident in what I'm about to say. But the idea of the prayer saying, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors," the idea behind that I find very interesting is, if I take a loan out and I make good on the loan for a while, the place where I got the loan from, they may choose to forgive the loan, or even if I can't repay it, they may choose to forgive the loan. Like, we still use that type of terminology today, right? So when we come into agreement with these spirits, regardless of how much we know about it or not, because there are predatory loan sharks out there, right? That's a thing that exists in the human world, right? The natural. We may not recognize necessarily all the fine print, but we still come into agreement and we're under the legality of that loan. What I find fascinating is when Jesus is on the cross and the very last thing that he says is, "It is finished." But that's actually a legal term that says that your debts have been paid. And teleos, I think is what it is. I was trying to search it up right now, but yeah. So the idea that the spirit world, or the unseen world, however you want to phrase that, functions in a very legal way, I think can be challenging for Christians, especially when they're not aware of that. To feel like, well, wait, don't I have freedom? You do have freedom. Absolutely. Like, Christ has set you free. So like at the core, right, you have salvation, but salvation is a moment. Sanctification is a process, right? And so it's like, so the freedom that you have, you only find more freedom the more you dive into it. And that's one of those things that I find to be incredibly fascinating. And the interesting thing is, if the unclean spirits are functioning in a legal way, but we all know that these unclean spirits were originally heavenly beings that dwelled in heaven and saw the way that God functioned and behaved. They're, again, like you said, trying to counterfeit that. And they're like, oh, well, if God can do this for you, well, I can do this for you. But they can't. But if we agree that they can, then they've got us. You know, they're able to function under that authority because we've given them that authority. And the other thing that I find very fascinating too is Jesus, before his ascension, says, "All authority on heaven and on earth has now been given to me." So when we talk about things like the temple is no longer a place, but is a person, it's within each of us, like as we accept Christ, right? Well, the idea is Jesus, in his ministry, went to all of known Israel at the time, to where the Israelites should have been, and all these sorts of things, and routed demons from all of that, cleaning the original area for where the temple should be. And then he says to his disciples, now go into the rest of the world and reclaim the rest of the world. And we even see things with like the 7 sons of Sceva, right? Where they go and they're like, oh, hey, we know about Jesus. Paul's doing some cool stuff. All right. So then they go and try to send out this demon saying, oh yeah, well, you got to leave this person because we know about Paul and all this. And the demon's like, okay, like I know Jesus, I've heard about Paul, I have no idea who you guys are. So what's the authority? Where on what grounds do you want to do this? So now not only do you not get this territory, but now I'm going to leave you packing without any clothes. Like I'm like whipping your tails, right? And all the 7 sons had left. And it's that idea, and I've used this analogy before, but it's like, imagine going to somebody's house and saying, by the way, this is my house now. And they're like, really? On what grounds?
Yeah. Where
No, not at all, right? And so that's literally when we talk about things about like, under Jesus' authority, or we're acting in his authority, the idea of like doing these things in my name, right? It's like if the king says to you, Kearsy, go do this thing, and you say, cool, I'll go do this thing, but like what happens if the people don't want me to do this thing? It's like, oh, hold on, take my signet ring or take this stamp. Like people will know that you're doing it on my authority because you have my authority with you, right? And so when we are functioning in that same way, right, when we're operating in the authority of Jesus, that's exactly what it is where we're going, the territory we're taking, provided we're keeping in step with the Spirit, we're being very intentional with those sorts of things. When we do things, it's not us doing them, even though we're doing the physical part of it, but it's Jesus in his authority doing it for us. So even when we pray in Jesus' name, it's again saying under Jesus' authority, right? It's with his authority that the things that we pray, that we believe are things that he is having us pray for, right? He will make those things happen. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm sure we've jumped way ahead in the story here, but we could go back to where you want to go. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things I want to point out too, one of the things that God had shown me is that in Matthew 12, with Jesus and Beelzebub, when they were basically telling him he was casting out demons, and he said, a nation divided against itself cannot. There were people before Jesus that would cast out demons, but it was in the same way like Moses, or when Moses was doing all of the plagues and all of the things, they were trying to get the magicians to do the same thing. There were people that could do it, but at the same time, like in order for a demon to be cast out of somebody, another demon had to give permission for it to happen. And so it wasn't like a total enslavement. It was just you're going from one prison to the next, and it's at the hand of them if they think it's useful and they can do something about it. And someone's probably going to go fact check me on this. So you do have to definitely read between the lines and have a little bit of historical context with that. But I did a whole thing. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have this like page I would put in my Bible about it. And it's interesting to see like when Jesus had came, he's like, no, the kingdom of heaven has come. Like I'm here, and he hadn't even like it hasn't even been finished yet. And he's like asserting his authority and reminding them that like, no, this is the kingdom of God. And that's why you guys are being set free. And so I do, like, just to kind of like add on to that really good word that you just gave, was that the enemy's job is to try to like, there's that saying of the lion that has no teeth, that can't hunt for itself, or it has no claws, the only thing it can do is roar. And the more threatened it is, the louder the roar is. The more fear that you're feeling and the more intensity in spiritual warfare, it means the enemy's threatened. Just point blank. It means that the enemy's threatened, and it means you need to go towards that roar and not away from that roar, because God is with you. And there's an encouragement that I always find is like the armor of God. Yes, it's the full armor of God, and we have to put the entire thing on, but there's no backplate, and there's no back place because we always have God with us. And so I think that going towards the enemy and standing firm against the enemy and knowing that we have God behind us and with us and leading us, that's where the freedom is. And which I guess is a kind of a really good segue to like jump back to when I was about 18. So at that point, just to kind of catch you up, is I had left the mental health docket. I've now been living on my own. I've been experimenting with drugs. And at this point, there was a man called Cheese. Everyone loved Cheese. That was his name. His name was Jeff Cheeseborough, and they would call him Cheese for short. I think the reason that I got as much help in the docket as I did is because Cheese would he was a connector. He had people in his wealthy network, and the probation officers would say, I need this. And he'd say, I'll make it happen. And he would go find the money. And he would come every Sunday to the juvenile detention center and he'd preach and he'd just teach about the gospel. And after I had done those drugs, I remember reaching out to Cheese and I was like, hey, can I meet with you? And I met him at the local Croc Center there, which is kind of like a YMCA. And I just was asking him, like, well, what is church? And I think there's a reason God didn't let him speak on that. But one of the things he told me at that time was, this is church. Like, you don't need to go to a fancy institution. Like, we can talk like this, but he could have led me to salvation prayer and he didn't at that point. And I know now that, if you fast forward a couple years between that time and the time that I moved out of the state, I just went on another bender. I ended up cheating on my high school sweetheart. We broke up, and he had been waiting for me to turn 18 because my mom was on welfare at the time, and she said, you can live out of my house, but if you leave the state and it affects me, you're done. Like, you're coming back home. I'm calling you in as a runaway. And so the grounds was I had to stay at least in the state and near the city until I turned 18. And so my high school sweetheart, the plan was for us to leave the day that I turned 18 because he didn't want to be in the hometown anymore. And when he found out I cheated on him, he was like, I'm done. Like, see you later. Sayonara there, chica. And good for him. Not long after I turned 18, or right before I turned 18, we actually decided to rekindle. And in the process of me going out to him, I was going to stop. And if it worked out, great. If it didn't work out, we weren't going to keep going. Like, I was just going to be done. I was going to leave. I was either going to go to New York or Florida. That was the places I was thinking about. And so on my 18th birthday at 3 a.m., I had all of my belongings. I packed up and put in the bottom of a Greyhound. It might have been 5 a.m., but crack it on. Packed all my belongings and put them in the bottom of a Greyhound bus with $30 to my name. I had no social security or birth certificate because I had my ID and I thought it would be fine. Well, my ID expired the day I turned 18 and I just didn't think anything of it. So by the time that I got to this new city, I couldn't get a job because I didn't have a valid ID, and I couldn't get a new valid ID because I didn't have a social security or birth certificate. So it's funny to see, like, God sustained us in that time. We were living in a family member of his basement. And during that time, I look back and that's one of the actual distinct times I saw a demon manifest without realizing I saw a demon manifest. Is I had been super drunk, and it was typically when I would mix alcohols, especially if there was whiskey involved, I would black out. But when I said black out, I laid down and went to bed and it was a peaceful night. And then I woke up and did something crazy. And he and I don't have a relationship. Like, I'm really close with his family because his mom was like, you're not leaving the family because you guys broke up when we broke up later. But he hasn't told me what's happened there, but he said I got up, I said some of the most violent and hurtful things to him. I threw glass at him, like shattered stuff. And in my mind, I was sleeping. So that scared me because that continued on for a little bit more. And I can see now how the enemy was trying to work in my life through a lot of instances like this. Well, him and I ended up, our relationship started going downhill really fast. I think within 6 months we had broken up. But the last final thing that just said we're done is we had gotten into our own apartment, and our first month bills were due. And I go into more detail in my book, but just to save for time, I ended up getting into camming. And there's two reasons I got into camming. I used the money excuse, but I wanted the attention. I wanted to feel the power. I wanted the attention. It's that same theme I had for why I allowed witchcraft to come in. But I wanted it to be, I had this idea, I remember hearing when I was younger, because I had this idea, when you look in culture, Marilyn Monroe, she sold herself basically, and the whole scandal with that. And Oprah was supposedly on a porno at one point, and Kim Kardashian, and all these people, you might not look up to them. I just was like, well, they got wealth and fame and money because they were just in it temporarily. So maybe I could do that, and I'll just make it a character. And if I can make it a character, it'll be like acting, and it's not who I am. It's not my identity. And so I had this scheme in my mind. I thought it was so brilliant, even though it didn't work out like this, that if I could create a character, it wouldn't be me, it would be that thing, and that I could have full control and autonomy. Again, I didn't, because I was in it for about a month, and but I was in it 12 hours, 14-hour days, the time I opened my eyes, the time I closed my eyes. And in the way that the camming industry works is you get paid with tokens, and those tokens translate to money, and you get paid more tokens if you go in private sessions and more if not. And I had told myself I'm not going to show anything to a certain extent, and I was going to reserve that. And I wasn't seeing money, I wasn't seeing stuff come in, and then it got really hard on me. I started drinking, and then we had a neighbor that was a biker, and he just wasn't a good guy, and he was did something where he was just like, get on the motorcycle, and he had drove me around and was just saying some really nasty derogatory things towards me and didn't even know that I was in that industry. And so just that mixed with some of the clients that I was getting and the things that I was seeing, like there was people that, and this is an uncomfortable thing for people to hear, but there were people that were actively in ministry or actively in churches that it was perceived to me as that were sending me Snapchats sitting at a family table with all of the food there and their entire family while they're showing the guy sitting next to them pictures of me, and I'm pretty sure their wife sitting across from them. Like, when you're 18 years old and you're seeing that happen and that's your interaction with the church, or you're being constantly like, you no longer have a name, you're labeled a B word or a C word, and that's how you're addressed, you immediately. And that's immediately. That's not like I've been in it for a couple years like some of these other girls did. And I knew that there would be a mental health toll on me. And I knew that there was a possibility that I could be caved into addiction. And so I intentionally told myself I'm only going to be in this for a little bit, and I'm going to turn it into like maybe a product line for that industry. And that's not how that works. So in the process of God really pulling me out of this, I went live for the last time. Well, I thought I was smart, and so I blocked all of the servers in my region in the Pacific Northwest and all of the surrounding states, just in case someone that was somewhat of a father figure to me growing up, or my grandpa, or someone that I knew maybe might have logged on and seen it, that they wouldn't see me. I unblocked it that night because I was like, I'm only doing it one time. I'm going to get as much money as I can, and I'm going to be done. I went live that night, and I got pulled into a private session, and it ended up being my dad. I never saw his face. It was just a black screen, but the way the conversation went and the way that I was being pushed to do stuff and the things that he said, it was just like, he would not give me his name. And I was like, will you just please give me your name? And then by the end of it, I was like, well, what's your name? And he said, Trevor, which was my dad's name. He said, Trevor. And then as soon as I looked at it and stopped, the live ended. And it was just everything that was said, the way the wording was, like, I knew that it was him, but I don't have like evidence. So 80-90%. And at that point, it was just this pit in my stomach, disgusting. I got off the live session and I was just standing there, like, just dumbfounded, staring at the camera. And my boyfriend, who's in the garage at the time, because we had a tiny studio and you were everywhere in that little studio apartment, or you were in the garage. And so he's in the garage playing video games, watching the live, and he calls me and he's like, you're not performing enough. You're not being enough, and you need to do more. And I had asked him to do that for me, to keep me accountable. And so it's not like he was this terrible guy. And I just lost it. Like, I threw the computer. I almost broke the TV. Like, I was so angry and mad. And that led to me being done with the industry. Not long after that, I supernaturally got a job working in corporate America. I shouldn't have gotten the job, because when I had dropped out of school when I turned 16, I kept failing the GED by 2 points because I just couldn't pass the math. And then because of these new restrictions that they had made a couple of weeks before, and so many kids were failing the math that they dropped it down by 2 points. And so when I logged on to be like, okay, I'm going to get my GED and do this right, I had my GED, so I could just step into this role. And this role was working for a company that it was with internet, like cable and internet services, and I was in retention. So my entire job was to talk you into keeping your cable and internet services, so you didn't cancel them. And I was really good at it, because within my first year and a half working there, I was nominated not top 10 sales in the entire company between the 3 companies they were merging with. I was working with Charter, and it became Spectrum. So they had like Lighthouse and Bright House and all the other things. And I don't say that to like brag on my own work. It was God, because he was showing me that I had a gift for communications, and I was really good at what I did because I sought people's needs, and I really embraced the idea that sales is serving. If you didn't need it, I didn't force you to keep it. I got you off the phone. And then the people that did need it, I worked with them to find a solution. And with the exception of I wasn't top dog, there was one person that kept beating me. And he ended up putting me on his devotional list, and because he was Christian. And I was like, what is up with these Christians? Like, they're all rich, they're all wealthy. And in my mind, my mom made $5,000 a year and was on welfare. So middle class is like, you're living the high life. And I was like, what is like all these Christian and their bedazzled butts, and they all win and they always beat me. And I was so frustrated. And so I actually ended up talking to this guy. His name's Nick. And he's like, well, I send devotions out. Like, do you want to be on it? And I was like, sure. Like, why not? And I start getting daily text messages from him. There's other people that are in my training that go to the same church as him, but they don't know each other. And it was just like one of my old mentors, she's like, it's the hounds of heaven. The hounds of heaven were surrounding me. And I just started getting curious, and all these people led me to this church. Well, the new college pastors for the college age group had just moved from Illinois. They had stepped down from working in marriage because they had been called by God to be in college. Well, it ended up working out perfect because when I walked into Emmanuel Baptist, like my first ever sermon, I was just blown away when I heard a scripture it was a sermon out of the book of Timothy, and it was just a love affair from that point. And I went a couple more times, and I ended up getting introduced to the marriage counselor. His name was Ryan. His wife Kim, and I would go and meet Ryan once a week, and he would give me homework the week before. I'd read through the book of John, and I'd bring him all these questions, and I would just like ask and ask and ask. And then he eventually ended up giving my life to Christ through him. And then I got invited to a Bible study with his wife, Girls with Swords by Lisa Bevere, and I was just in love. I was in love with the idea that we're warriors as Christians, and that it isn't this meek. So I saw meek as a bad thing. I know meek's not a bad thing anymore, but it wasn't this like, you're mousy, incontent, super boring, don't know how to have a good life. Like, there was so much strength and power. And what had been amazing to me is I went through the doc, I told you about all those hours, is I didn't have healing. I didn't have freedom. I knew of the things. I had like the tools in the toolbox, but the tools weren't effective, essentially. Like, it wasn't like there was any strength behind them. And it was the minute that I was introduced to Jesus and I started reading through this word, I was like, y'all left like the 100% out. Like, you gave me the principle without giving me, or you gave me the healing without like, tried giving me the healing without the healer. And so it was just one of those things that the minute that I had started reading the Bible, everything connected. And I just became obsessed with this idea of leadership and wanting to steward what God had given me well. And so I started studying all these things about business, all these things about leadership. And it was kind of like as I studied business and sales and leadership, I'm questioning the gospel. And the more that I started understanding leadership, it was like the Bible was at the center. And then God's also getting my attention. And so he just perfectly met me there. And there was lots of supernatural ways that he met me. Like, there was one day, I was really feeling it, and I remember going down to the river, and I just sat there on the riverbed, and I just watched the pages of my Bible like flip back and forth. And it was like I would read something, and then the pages would go against the wind, and then I would read something, and then they'd go with the wind. And I haven't shared this with a whole lot of people, but it was just like, as I would read it was like he was fully talking to me, and I was like, I'm ready to get baptized. And so I called Kim at the time, and I was like, I'm ready to get baptized. And she's like, well, that's not how that works. You can come over. And so I went to her house and had nachos, and I got baptized. Well, not long after getting baptized, which was pretty amazing, that the night before I had given my crystals, like I had mentioned, and I remember walking into my house, and it was like I was walking on clouds. So it was just my journey to deliverance is God gave me a step each time I needed that step, and there was freedom on each side of the step, and that sustained me for a while until he led me to the next thing. And it was amazing. It literally felt like having 10 pounds of weight on your shoulder too. You go get rid of these crystals, you come home, and it was like you didn't even realize the weight was there until it was gone. And so that kind of happened that August. I got baptized, I think that April. That August, we went on a mission trip to Ecuador. And it was like a 2-week trip. I wouldn't consider it like a full-on mission, like people that are called to the mission field, but it was enough for me to see what was going on in other worlds. And as beautiful as the town was, they were struggling with a lot of things. And in the process of this mission trip, and I ended up dating a boy, and we were doing the right thing. Like, right, it was, I'm gonna do the God thing. I'm not gonna just go date. We're not just gonna sleep together. We're not gonna do all this stuff. Like, I want to do it right. Well, he was from Ensenada, and which is just outside on the other side of the border in between California and Mexico. But his mom raised him in Ensenada, but he was an American citizen. So he would come up here. He would work on like in North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana area, and then he'd go back home. And he wanted to go back home. And him and I didn't have a healthy relationship. It was also like a fire and gasoline, as we'd do something, and then the other one would pour gasoline, and we'd walk away from each other, and the other one would ignite it. And it was this back and forth. But we ended up getting in a fight. He like moved away, and similar to what I did with my high school sweetheart, I tried chasing him. And in the process of chasing him, he was like, well, I'm done with the relationship. He hangs up on me and just ghosts me for 3 days. And there was someone that I had met at the gym, because I was going to the gym a lot, trying to like be healthy, and invited this boy over, and he just basically didn't know when to leave when I asked him to leave. And so he just kind of had his way with me, and ended up into being one of those situations. I didn't speak up or say anything. I was so like, at this time I should probably say that. So at this time, the neighbor below me committed suicide, and I took it really to heart, because this neighbor I was trying to lead to Christ. I had asked him to come to church. He was in his 60s or 70s, and he had a pretty crazy story, and he was just depressed, and he knew that he was committing suicide, and he knew that he wanted his daughter to find him, but he had thought that I was leaving to Southern California The day that I was supposed to leave was the day he committed suicide. And I ended up actually staying a couple more weeks so that I could get more. It was like a $3,000 difference in pay that I was going to be able to walk away with. So I stayed a little bit longer, and I didn't get a chance to tell him I was staying longer. And so I remember there was one day I got walked out of my apartment, and I was just sitting there waiting for someone to bring me the keys. And I hear his daughter, like, because it's -8 degrees out. We're in Montana. But I hear his daughter like thud through, and we had an apartment complex that kind of, you go up and there's apartment, and you can go down and there's an apartment. My apartment was here, his apartment was here. And so I hear her thud down the stairs, and I hear her pound on the door, like, Dad, are you in there? And she opens the door, and you slowly just hear her walk in, and you hear Dad, and then you hear her scream. She runs outside, and she's just puking all over the front. And so I listened to the entire thing that happened. And mind you, it's been a while. It's 2 days before Christmas, and you can smell his flesh through the entire corridor. Like, you can smell the rotting. He used a shotgun. I don't know how no one didn't hear that in the timing that they did. And so it was, good morning. It was definitely, hi, this is my son. Hi, buddy. Hi. And so, hi, my dude. So he, yeah, so it was definitely a situation, and I think it just had a mental toll on me because I took it too seriously. I was like, I could have done something in this person's life. I could have been a change for them, and I failed. Like, I chose not to speak up, and one of the things is the Holy Spirit was prompting me. The last time I talked to him, I told him I was going to get a list of all these places that he should go so that he could find community, because he would go to work in the automotive department at Walmart, and then he would go to the casino. And he worked overnight shifts, so he had nobody that was healthy. He wasn't interested in going back to church. He had church hurt. And so I was going to give him a bunch of places to go to meet people in these beautiful places I'd seen in Montana. And he ended up, and then the days leading up to what would have been the suicide, I was at work, and I had the option to say no to going in, but I was so hungry for money. I kept hearing the Holy Spirit while I was at work go, get him the list, get him the list, get him the list. And it was a subtle voice, and I just didn't. And then the voice stopped. And then the day that he ended up being found, when I walked in the corridor that day, I heard Jake's dead. And so for me, it was like, I had the opportunity to do something. Am I responsible for his death? No. I can't take fault for that. But could I have made a change if I was obedient to what God was commissioning to me to do, or God was calling me to do? And I've had other situations like that in my life since, where I wasn't fully obedient and that person lost their life, or something happened and I could have been the last life defense. So I took it super serious. I remember after that and the breakup, and then on top of that, I just found out, or as I'm getting ready to transfer my job at work, I just was overwhelmed. And so I decided the thing that I was going to do to make sense to handle this overwhelm was I was going to drive, after being up for 24 hours, another 20 hours to Southern California to go talk to this boyfriend in person. And total manic episode. By the time that I got down there, I was so exhausted that I just fell asleep, and I slept for like a day and a half. Well, I had gotten a bunch of calls from my boss, my boss's boss, my boss's boss's boss. The police had been called. They went and did a welfare check on me, and the police went through my apartment, and I had like hookah there, like the flavored tobacco, and they had found my roommate had a W-2 there. They went to her work, and she worked at the Boys and Girls Club with kids. So police are pulling her out of her classroom, and they're like, hey, why is she in here? What's going on? That we have a missing persons. And so she's in the process of applying to get a promotion. She doesn't get the promotion ultimately because of my actions. And so then the church found out about it. And like, I got text messages from my pastor at the time telling me that I wasn't Christian. And I got text messages from like all these people just being like, are you okay? You lost your job? Like what's happening? And it was, ultimately me sabotaging. And that was a curse that God showed me recently that I need to lift, is that, or not, he's the one that lifts it, obviously, but to bring to him before in that courts thing that we just mentioned. And it was 100% sabotage. It seemed like, anyway. And then, I'm like, I'm down in Southern California. I was a no-call, no-show to work, so the transfer is no longer going through. I've lost my job. I've lost my career, and this was the one chance that I had. And so I at least have like $7,000 in savings in California that'll last me about 2 weeks. But up home in Idaho, it was before everyone had moved up to Idaho, that would last me like 6 months. So I was like, I'll just go home and I'll be there for a little bit. I'm going to join the military. And I'll start a marketing agency, and I'll have like a job I do on the side while I enlist in the military, and I'll do both.
So 2 questions that are diametrically opposed questions. One is, when you were kind kind of binging on alcohol, you said you saw a demon manifest. So what was that? What did that did you like, when you say you see it, like how did you know it was a demon? Like what was that like?
I typically I didn't it's a no, it's not a C. So like I mean, I would see mirages in my room like late at night and stuff like almost like it. And when I say see, it would be like if you looked there, it was like as if someone was standing there, but you couldn't see anyone. This sense, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Hmm.
Um, when it came to when I would drink, it was I went to sleep and I would wake up and find out I did something. So for one instance, I went to bed. I had been drinking at home. I went to bed. I woke up the next morning and my coworker was in my bed
I
and
see.
was like, we just did stuff. You need to do more stuff with me. And I'm like, no, we didn't. Like, how did you end
Mhm.
up in my house? Like, how are you even here? And he's like, that was the best time I ever had. And I'm like, I don't even know what happened. And it's stuff like that happened often to the point that I was terrified. And it was mostly in perversion. It was when it would come to that is it would be some sort of seduction or some sort of perversion, and it was always tied to alcohol to the point that I was like, I'm just done. I don't want to be a part of it anymore. And um, later on, when I started seeing them, it would be more in the mirror. I would look in the mirror, and there's that verse like a fool doesn't remember his reflection, and I couldn't remember what I would look like. It would be like I'm looking at my face, but I'm not on the other side of it, but I can talk and I can like do things and my eyes didn't look like my eyes and I felt psycho and so that's kind of more what it was.
Sure. And then, so moving on to you're at work and you hear the Holy Spirit say, like, get him the list, get him the list, get him the list. What is that voice? Or what, how are you hearing it?
It was like a still small voice. It was very sweet. It was very gentle. It was a whisper. At that time in my life, I remember one of my friends like pointing it out. There was different cadences. It was almost like a raspy snarl versus a like when I would hear one voice like and it would just be like a subtle thought that was left wing that wasn't applying to the situation we were in. It would be raspy and it would be more sinister and it typically would be associated with some sort of perversion or lying or something along those lines. And then on the other side of it, when it was typically God or the Holy Spirit, it would be very like a left wing thought, but it would be very sweet and it would be honoring and it would be loving and it would be rooted to love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, or faithfulness. And so I didn't know if it was God. I didn't know if it was the enemy at the time, but I knew that if I went to the word and it aligned with who God was and his character was, I could say it was God or it wasn't God. And typically, like the enemy lies, deceives, cheats. And so if you know that it's God's voice by the more that you're in the word and like, that's your weapon. And so that's just kind of what I found out. And yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting, and I don't know if this is true in all situations, but there was somebody else who I had interviewed who actually two people who I've interviewed so far that they would say when they felt a presence in the room, oftentimes it would be accompanied by just like a really like loud some type of noise that just was like cacophonous in their ears, right? They couldn't really focus and they didn't know really kind of how to respond, and so it was just a very distracting, very all encompassing sort
Got
of
it.
noise, right? And it just reminds me of and I'm trying to look up the verse because I don't I always get it wrong if it's Elijah or Elisha, but like on the mountaintop, I think it's Elijah, right? Where God's like, all right, I want you to like wait for me, and it's not in the loud noise, right? It's not in the mighty wind, it's not in all these, but it's in that like small, still sort of whisper sort of thing. And it's very interesting to me how when we hear from God, when we hear from the literal creator of every single thing, right? The one who's not bound by anything, the one who we call eternal, but even he's not bound by eternity, right? Like just this amazingness, right? But then when he chooses to talk to us, what do we hear? Comfort, peace, rest, things that we can't account for, especially when it's in the middle of situations that we should not by all means feel, those sorts of feelings, to feel
Yeah.
peace or feel rest, right? But then when we're in a place where we would assume is our place of comfort, our place of refuge, our bed, our home, things that we should say, we can, like the idea of like home sweet home, right? Like, but then it's like, here we are in our home, but there is no peace in our home, or there is no peace in my bed, or there is no rest in my bed because of the types of attacks and spiritual things that are going on. I mean, I think the interesting thing is those who may not have the exact supernatural experiences and encounters that you're talking about, or that previous guests have talked about, it doesn't mean that they're not experiencing anything, but it may be more along the lines of that they're just not experiencing the extreme or the level of it, or even unfortunately, they may just be so numb to it that they're just, this is just how my brain works, or this is just how my house is, or this is just, that sort of thing. And yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised, honestly. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about really briefly too is I know you'd mentioned that you had spent some time doing like camming before like OnlyFans was a thing, and obviously, we know what OnlyFans is typically made for. Um, I remember years ago, and I'm sure, unfortunately sure, that this stat has not changed, but at every pastor's conference, at every ministry conference, the hotel that books them, the amount of pornography that is purchased goes through the roof. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think the best thing to take away from that is the fact that the church as an institution is not God's voice, is not God's, is not what God wants with us, right? Obviously, we recognize as Christians the value of a body, of a person, and even with my own children, they're not young anymore, but they're not old enough to get absolutely, really nitty gritty about like, here's what this looks like. But basically with my sons, who are my two oldest kids, I say, another person's naked body is not your naked body. That's not something that you look at, because that naked body isn't your body. And that person may get married to somebody, and that those people will share, to be able to see each other naked, and, just to try to remind them of the sanctity of nakedness, right? There's something about that, right? That God has given to us. And now we live in an age where we could just type the wrong thing in on a Google search and we're seeing things we shouldn't see, And so on that note too, another thought that had come across my mind was how the Bible talks about in all things that you do them as though you're doing them for the Lord, right? I know that you're not the only person who has been part of the adult industry who is like, this is a facade, this is a character, because we try to separate ourselves, like who I am is a good person, but what I do may not be a good thing. And it's interesting because in that verse, God kind of asks us to lay that bare and say, well, hold on a second. It doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, but you're doing it for me, or you should be doing it for me. And so I think that that's interesting, that even outside of those who may not even have a relationship with God still recognize, like, I can't let this become who I am, right? And the last thing that came to my mind with all of this, and this has been honestly the theme that has been prevailing through most of the episodes that I've recorded so far, is that the kingdom of darkness, I love the verse that you're referring to, where Jesus is like, oh yeah, like if I was here for Beelzebub, like the kingdom can't stand, right? Like if your kingdom goes against itself, it can't stand. And it's right. He's true, but boy, do they try. And like you said, people will come, these false messiahs come and are like, I cast you out. And then a new demon says, yeah, that's fine. So you cast this one out and I'll go back in. And even Jesus says, just a heads up, when you clean the house, something's going to want to occupy the house, right? So even Jesus is saying, if you cast out demons, recognize you need to replace them with something, because if not, they're going to come and replace themselves with themselves 7 times as strong, right? And so the thought for me is the kingdom of darkness, and there's a Latin term that I love that there's a theologian, Chad Bird, who talks about this Latin term, but I can't remember it. But it's this idea of the kingdom of darkness curls in on itself. And so it's like even like the idea of your stepmom saying, well, I'm a white witch. And I've interviewed people who were white witches who are like, well, I'm not near as bad as, someone who does black magic. And then the people who say that they're doing black magic are like, well, I'm not as bad as the person who's a Satanist. And the person who's a Satanist is like, well, I don't believe in any of this stuff anyway. And I'm not like my magic and what I do is much more powerful than, and it's like, it's all self-defeating. It's all self-defeating. And so we as a modern culture love nuance, which can be good and bad, but it's interesting that the idea behind Christianity in a lot of ways is are you working with the cleanest, the holiest of spirits or the unclean spirits? And that's it. There's really no middle ground. And that's and it's interesting in the modern age how we feel like that's a negative, when really we're recognizing kind of the ramifications of that. Well, we can't say that this person is bad, but the thing that they did is, it's like, well, hold on a second. Like, again, if the house is dirty, if any hot part of the house is dirty, right? Like the house is dirty, right? So clean the house. I feel like the trick with all that, and the reason I'm bringing it up in this way, the nuance aspect of it, is because we can chase for a long time the things that we feel are good in us. And we can try to say, well, these things are good, and ignore the bad, right? And all it does is lead us to the same exact detriment of if we would have just stayed in that bad anyway, right? We're dead to our own sinful nature. And it doesn't matter if we try to find positives, good, general human morality is a thing, but that doesn't say anything about salvation. You can be a nice person. You can be a good person. You can be a hard worker. You can do all the right things all the time. You can do your absolute best, but none of that says anything about salvation, because that is something that is unmerited, undeserved, unearned, but freely given. And that's, I think, why it's so hard for a lot of people, is because we want to be good. We want to, I want to make money. So I'm going to create a persona and I'm going to be in front of a camera for 10 plus hours every day. I want to benefit my family. I grew up in poverty. I know how to make money. I am going to do these things. So there's almost like a virtue to it. And even that idea of like, now I'm separating myself. This is my character. This is my persona. And so all these things that happened, I can look back on it and be like, wow, weren't those weird things that this other person did, because it's not me. And again, it's this whole self-defeating, folding in on itself sort of way of living. And it's just interesting how God asks us to live in a sense in the day, in the light. I don't want you to hide who you are. I don't want you to hide what you do. I don't want you to hide me from anyone. But in all things, right, I am evident, I am present, I am with you. And if you do all things for me, that's what I'm asking, right? That's what I want. And that's one of those things that it's just interesting to see how the kingdom of darkness is this very self-defeating mechanism, because it's like, well, my darkness isn't as dark as your darkness. And then they're like, well, my darkness isn't as dark as their darkness, or I want more darkness and your darkness isn't dark enough. And it just, again, the infighting, anyway, just.
Oh, no, I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because there's a couple of things that came to mind. Is there's that one parable where the tax collector and the Pharisee both stand before they go to the temple, where they go before God, and the Pharisee is like, thank God I'm not like these other people. Like, thank God I'm not as bad as them. And the tax collector's like, I'm a sinful being and I'm a terrible person. And it was not the Pharisee that was endeared in that conversation. And in the other way is like, the best of people here on this earth is filthy rags. And I really am a big fan of Ali Bestucky, and one of the things that she says is that, like, you're not enough, and that's okay. Like, that's okay. That's good. And it's because Jesus is enough and Christ is enough, and that is the reason why he came to save us, and that is the reason why we have a chance at freedom, is because of his goodness and in his mercy and his grace. And so I find that really encouraging. And like, I'm really glad you brought up the empty house saying, is because that was something that I struggled with in my deliverance process, was like, is the door open? Is the window open? And I don't know if this is necessarily a biblical thing or if there's like evidence to it. And I'm always welcome to talk about something like this. But I feel like what God had showed me was I shut those doors when you became saved and you got baptized, but you kept letting them in. So until I came to recognition and I repented and I brought that before him, it wasn't like they could keep coming in. It wasn't like they could keep feeding in. It was only when I let them in or I welcomed them in. So by me choosing not to lay down my own flesh and my own sin, and by me choosing not to acknowledge the reality and the depravity that I was living in, I lost out on what true freedom was, versus if I would have just surrendered that, repented that, and then chose to keep doing well. I mean, obviously there's a point of it's better to fall down 77 times and get back up each time. But if you can do it right the first time, learn from other people's failures and do it right and fully surrender to God. And I know that that's easier said than done, because like you said, it's uncomfortable to say that we're not good. It's uncomfortable to say that we're not there, because a lot of people do struggle with the Danny Silk orphan child mentality. And that's, even if you have the best of upbringings, everybody struggles with it, because we do have an enemy that prowls around like an lion. And the good news is that even though we're not enough, we have a God that says that we are. And we have a God, like we were just talking about, that wants to come and comfort you. He wants to bring you peace. He doesn't promise a good time. He doesn't promise an easy life. He promises that you have peace in the midst of it. In fact, you're probably going to have a harder life as a Christian, but you're going to fight from victory with victory, and you're going to have all the resources you need, and you're going to have him with you. And so how much better is that? And the worst that can happen is you die, and it's in this body, in this bag of bones, but you're going to get to go home. And so that's like the absolute worst. I know some people say there's worse than that, but like in my mind. And so I find freedom in knowing that as long as the house is swept clean and it's the Spirit dwelling within it, the Spirit will stay there and those doors will stay shut as long as you allow them to be shut. But if you keep opening them, like that's where, and I think that that's where people get deceived, and like that's where that fear can come in, and their walk post deliverance is another one going to come in. And I see a lot of people, they don't like religion because they're attributing the term religion to legalism. And there's a lot of legalism, and legalism is birthed in fear. And which kind of brings me to like that you were saying, like pastors, when they were in, would do conferences at the hotels, the views would skyrocket. I believe that. And one of the things that I found out is God actually uses my testimony in the camping industry remarkably, which we'll get into in a minute. But when I first was saved, I was so excited that I was saved and on fire for God and all the cool things. That was the first thing I'd be like, my name's Kearsy and God did this and God did that. And I was saved by this through this. And then the next thing I would follow up with is I was in this industry, and people would shut down. And I didn't realize until I had been married for almost a year that 80% of men and 60% of women in the church struggle with it, and that it is actually a common household name. I also didn't understand. I'll have to give you the link on Curios. There was a woman that I interviewed, Jessica Brown. Her husband's a pretty well-known pastor, but she is a gynecologist, and she talks about gynecology and porn addiction from a doctor's perspective. And one of the things she talked about in that interview was that most people don't realize that porn is a drug, and that it can actually be seen on brain scans, that you can, the more that you get, the more addicting it gets. And it's equivalent to opium or meth or cocaine. And that's why people get addicted, and that's why people get hooked. And she's like, no one wakes up being a pedophile, but what happens in these addictions, especially over long-term, unaddressed, untalked about, is that it gets less and less vanilla, more and more hardcore, and then the people get younger and younger, and it gets rougher and rougher, and that next thing you wake up and you have this really bad issue. And from what I've seen, like just kind of tacking on to her inspiration, her wisdom there, is that we have a culture that's, I'm going to kill all the pedophiles, which great, you're standing up for young people, but you've also created an environment that if somebody is struggling with those tempting thoughts, they don't have a safe place to go and get help and to confess their sins. And so it doesn't enable it and it doesn't make it right. But it also, like, I think as a church, I would hope that we would do better in providing a place for someone to say, I have a problem, I need help. Now, obviously, there's going to be boundaries. You're not going to be alone with kids. You're not, like, there's certain things in certain places you need, and you can get help, and there's groups for that. I had no idea it was that bad. Like, and I had no idea that that spirit of perversion was as rampant that it was, or that it's an epidemic that it is. And I think there's a saying that I heard Charlie Kirk say is, like, you can judge a man a lot by his enemies. And if you look at the way that the enemy attacks the church, it's constantly with perversion, and it's constantly with seduction, and it's constantly in a way and a means that if a representative of God, an ambassador of Christ, is caught with that red-handed, even in Jesus' time, they were doing this with the adulterous woman when they were dragging her out of the house. It's the biggest shame possible, and it's a checkmate when it comes to debating, because it's people are using it as prescriptive versus descriptive. And if you can get somebody in that, well, congratulations, the church is bad, and now you can amplify this message of church hurt. And so, are the struggles there? Are they very real? Yes. But I fully believe, as somebody who was in it, you don't have to be enslaved to the addiction itself. Like, you can be set free, and some people, they need deliverance. Other people, it's a process, and I'm not necessarily clinical psychologist to talk so much on this, but I have experience, like in my life, once I got deliverance, like there was no temptation for it. But after, because I actually, when I got in it, I didn't have a temptation with it. I didn't have, like, in my mind growing up, I remember going to houses and it was playing on the TV in the living room to like my friends. And it was just so normal. And if something's not good in your marriage, you go do this. And like you were saying, like we prescribed this idea, we're good. I had convinced myself I was doing a service to marriages and that this is what marriages needed, because if a woman didn't want to perform, I could perform for them. And that's also a lie, is it's not what God intended. And marriage is one of those things that is supposed to represent Christ's relationship with the church. Like, we're going to be presented as a bride and we're still engaged. We haven't even been married. Like, that's that feast in heaven. And so if you can pervert that bride and can pervert the image of the bride, then what does that mean for the God that we serve? And what does that mean for who Christ is? And which I think is so beautiful about marriage, that he gives us that imagery and what he intends in. Like, you, and kind of a sidetrack, but like in scripture, people think, oh, there's not going to be giving and taking in marriage. Well, they're talking about being sold as a product. They're talking, like, that's what Jesus is talking about, because that's what people did in time. You see it oftentimes in Islamic culture right now. But this idea of two coming together before God as one to serve each other with God at the center. They fully willingly came. They weren't given because the brother died and it was passed to the next brother and it was this. You're not a product. You chose to be obedient what God had, and he provided something for you. It's a beautiful, like, beautiful imagery of the church. And if the enemy can try to pervert that by bringing in adultery or bringing in that seduction, temptation, it destroys the very thing that we have as ambassadors of Christ to represent to the world of what our God's love is for us. And it just, so yeah, I mean, I'm kind of repeating myself at that point, but it's something that when I first became a Christian, it was so taboo, so sweep it under the rug. We only talk about it behind closed doors. But then I would also see people that would struggle with it and bring it to their pastors and be bold and say, I need help in this. And the pastors would become obsessive, restrictive, and to the point that it was unhealthy in their marriage. And so I've seen both sides of it. And I know that there's probably groups out there that do really well. Jessica's talked about a couple of those things, and there's things that we can do as parents, kind of adding on to what you were saying, is like, my kids aren't allowed to play games online. They're not allowed to play social media. They're not allowed to be on anything digital until they're 18. Same with having anything more than a flip phone, or we don't allow headphones at home. I know a lot of people are like, that's weird, but if you're listening to something that we like, if you can't listen to it without headphones, why are you listening to it? Now, I understand people want privacy, but I want to listen to what you're listening to. Like, let's have conversation about it and let's create a communal effect around it. There's no screens behind closed doors ever at any point. It is always in open communal areas. And even like my kids are 5 and under right now, is, well, unfortunately, we do have a culture that's rampant with lust. And if I completely hoard them and tell them that it's don't do this, the minute that they get older, they're going to want to go do it. So what I can do is say, this is a reality. This is what the world thinks. This is what scripture says. And I don't want to, because I remember when I first became a Christian, people be like, oh, purity culture, like, it was awful, it was so bad, it was this thing. And it's like, I don't fully understand a whole lot about purity culture, but what I do understand when it comes to what God intends for purity, and what I hope maybe the movement meant, is that what marriage is supposed to be, but they made like sex and the beauty of sex in marriage under the right covenant, under what God intended it to be, a bad thing. And so with our kids, we just go like, God one day has a wife for you. So like, wait for her. We'll pray for her. Like, we've included our young boys to pray for their future spouses, and know that when you have that, it's going to be beautiful and it's going to be amazing. But like, when we're watching a show, if we see people like making out and they're not married, I'm like, oh, they're not married. Let's not look. And I know it's like dramatic for toddlers, but it's enough too. Or if there's even someone in a swimsuit, we look the other way and we explain why we look the other way. And so it's gotten to the point that my kids will see someone with a swimsuit on and they'll grab the remote and they'll start flipping it forward because they don't want to see it. And so we as parents can put those things in our kids and instill those habits in our kids, and give them the why of, because God has something promised to you and you want to be able to and share all of that with that future person that he has for you. And so, I mean, like, kind of just like commenting on what you're saying, and then like showing tools that's worked in our house, it's been very helpful, and it's been encouraging to see that, because I do think that sanctity of marriage is such a strong representation of God's love for us. And if we can honor that, it's amazing.
Yeah, so I'm kind of a word nerd about things. I work as a sign language interpreter, and so, thinking about things even like saying, you know, oh, you typically will start out with watching something more vanilla and then work your way towards something more hardcore. But wait a second, isn't all of it the same thing? We're still watching pornography, aren't we?
It's all bad.
And
Yeah,
and
it's all
and
bad.
and I think that that's really one of the tricks is, well, it's again, it's this idea of like, but I'm only watching this, I'm not watching this.
Mm-hmm.
But if I am curious
Not that
about
bad.
this, if I watch this, at least it's not this. But if I am curious about this, and then we, you know, that idea, I hate the term slippery slope, but I mean, I think that's kind of the idea. Or even like you're saying the person who's the clinical or the gynecologist who says like the things that are firing in your brain are the same things that are firing in your brain when you're under some sort of drug usage, right? And I understand that, and for being a person who has had to work through that in a lot of ways in my own life, it got to a point. It's the idea of when you recognize how good God is, then you recognize how tasteless, how bland, how, you know, uninteresting all these other things are. And I've never been a drug addict, but I can imagine that when you recognize how good life is outside of drugs because of a life of Christ, then you go back because of this addiction mentality. You know you're going back because you're a slave to it. And that is
There ain't
an
no hiding, no
awful,
time.
awful feeling. And that's one of those things where I wish more people would recognize the chains for chains instead of saying, well, I've only got one link or I've only got two links. You're still enslaved. It really doesn't matter what kind you're watching. It doesn't matter what thoughts you're thinking, but they're still there, and they're still contrary to what God has enabled for us. And like you're saying, the idea of what does a godly marriage look like? And then the perfect representation of Christ for his bride, right? Like the idea of he was willing to give all for his bride. So the bride, in the same way, is willing to give all for the groom. And if I don't embody that with my relationship with my wife, and if she doesn't embody that with her relationship with me, right, that's cause for correction on both of our parts. And I like to think about, and maybe this is maybe the most nerdy thing I'll say all day today, but I like to think about if God is at the top, is at the center, and we are on this, yes, the triangle, exactly. And the closer we are to God, the closer we are able to have a relationship with one another, because it's not about me being a good husband, but it's about God being a good groom and me learning from that. Right. And so that's really the success story of my marriage with my wife, is not how good I am, but is how good God is, because I did not have an excellent representation of what a good father, a good husband looked like. And so kind of flying blind in a lot of these ways, or even TV shows like Step by Step and Family Matters, it's like, you know, they were more father figures to me than my own father was, just because of the way that I was raised, right? And so to see now, what does a father and a husband look like in a godly context, as a Christian, as a believer, it revolutionizes everything, because then it's not like, you know, the problem with those types of sitcoms is it's like 30 seconds, the problem happens and it's over, or 30 minutes and it's over, right? Or 22 with commercials, right? But it's like in real life, it's like every encounter I have with my children, every encounter you have with your children is an opportunity to show God to them, to be that representation, to function in the Holy Spirit. And with my wife and you with your husband, one thing that has really challenged me and has been a beautiful thing, and I've even given some people some marital advice, but it's always simple. When you fight, and you will fight for each other. And that's because
I like that.
that's what God did for us, right? He fought for us. And so we fight for him. And the way that we do that is in the spirit, and we do that in the physical, right? And because ultimately we know that he wants the relationship. And if we want the relationship, then we both fight for it. That's just how it is, you know. That's the beauty and the challenge and the nuance, I guess, if you will. The nuance of it is, you still love me even though I know who I am.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
So
That's so good. We say we don't fight each other, we fight next to each other, but I like don't fight for each other. That's I might borrow that. I'll say, just jumping into marriage and what marriage is so I kind of gave you guys a little bit of a background of me and Roxy and how I created the stage name Roxy. Well, the reason that I'm so vocal and forthcoming with that is God did not let that be buried. Sometimes people can get away with I buried my past and like, you don't know the things I've done. I just was a sinner, and that was not my story. I had just sabotaged my job in corporate America. I'm now traveling slowly up the West Coast because if I'm going to travel, I might as well go slow and savor it because I know I can survive for quite a few months while I'm staying up back home in Idaho, and I'm going to go to the military. And one of the things that I was, or while I was traveling, once I got home, my mom she's a cosmetologist, and she had a client who worked in cybersecurity and was looking for a nanny, and super amazing woman, but she was going through her own hard stuff. Anyway, she ended up getting me a job to work for her for the summer, and I ended up moving in with her. And you see God's hand because during that time of me living with her, some explosive things came out in her marriage, and her husband got arrested for things, and there was house arrests and some not so endearing things to have to navigate. And in the middle of that divorce, I was living there and just nanny to the son. And so it was nice to be able to be that person for that kiddo in that time. And that's important because while I'm living with this family and kind of just navigating all those things, I am also starting to go back to church. I end up in a relationship there. There ends up being a date rape situation. So I get out of that. I'm like going back to God. And there was a lot of those situations. And it was like, even though we had talked about like that house was closed, I'd end up in a situation like I went to go pick him up for church and he invited me in, and then things happened. And so it was like one of those things and he was in the leadership program. And so the thing that was hard about that one was he told the pastors that he was living in the pastor's house. He was in the basement, and he told them before I told them, and I'm a newcomer to the church. It's a brand new church, and he's in the leadership program living in the associate pastor's house. And so the amount of damage control that happened and so how fast it happened was really difficult. By the time that I finally was able to talk to somebody, it was like I had leprosy when I walked into that church. Like people just stepped aside. And so I went to a different church, which was the heart of the city. And at this church, I don't know if it was prophetic or he was just saying something, but I had applied to work in the kids ministry with like young adults because I really wanted to get the heart of those young girls that were just wild, like wilding out like I was. And because I knew I could speak to them, and I knew that I knew where they were coming from, and I understood them in a way that a lot of people in ministry wouldn't necessarily understand them. And in part of the interview, the lead pastor at the time made a comment, if you're going to come in here, you can't manipulate staff like you did at the last place. And I was like, what? Like, so there's a thing in the town that I was in is all of the church pastors got together and they would talk. And I had not told anyone about anything that had happened with this lead and the situation. That the youth pastors at the new church that I was attending, the pastors from the other church had made an effort to seek out and tell him. And so I don't know if he maybe was just discerning and said something prophetically. I kind of brushed over it because it was like, wow. And anyway, I ended up going and volunteering with them. And around that time, I was already starting to cut weed out of my life. Weed was one of the last things that I don't have any evidence to say this, but I think that it does open a spiritual door in some sense because there's a term in the drug world called I was fiending. I was fiending so bad to the point like you just have to have it, and it's like your skin's crawling, and if you don't get it or you don't get this like control, it just comes over you. It's this temptation, and nothing is good. And it's like a thirst that can't be quenched, but in a really nasty way. And there was a couple situations I had where I needed it, which makes me think that that was not natural. And at that point, there was one situation I was so in my head and in my depths and terrified about what was next to happen. And I can see it now as the enemy was roaring louder because God was about ready to do a massive breakthrough in my life. And I got high before I went to church as a young adult, like leader. And I remember sitting there and a girl gave her life to Christ. And I'm sitting in a group and it was me and another leader. And this other leader had a similar background as far as like in the promiscuous world, but she was trans. And so she has now left that. She's living boldly for the gospel. She's on fire. She's completely surrendered all addiction. She's no longer into that stuff while I'm sitting here. And I just feel so mousy and shameful. And I tried leading this girl next to me to Christ. And it was like, God just shut my mouth up. And I watched this other girl lead her to Christ. And it was like God being like, no, she gets this. You don't get this. And it's not about like points or check boxes for me, but it was just something like that was the whole point of why I was there. And it was cool to see God be like, I'm not going to give you a stage and a platform when you're not going to honor me well. And so I actually ended up going to the leaders and I told them that happened. And I had stepped down from youth ministry later, and this was over the period of like a year and a half. I was in that church for quite some time, and while I was at that church, there was a program called Transformed. It was a Rick Warren study, and you would go every Tuesday, watch a video, and that's important because while I'm pursuing God, I'm finding this new church, I'm getting rooted in, I'm preparing to join in the military, but this is where I'm going to be until I deploy off and while I start my marketing agency. I'm just trying to figure stuff out, and then the last church I was at, I now have this very like open wound of church hurt, but I feel like there's no one I can go to. And so I felt I could see how most people would have turned bitter. And there's a saying I really like. The difference between a villain and a hero is the villain said, they both have the same story. They both have a background of trauma. The villain, though, said, I'm going to get back at the world, where the hero said, I'm going to help the world. And I had this friend when I first became a Christian that was incredible. And she would always say, Kearsy, broken people run the church. The church is going to hurt you, but it's not the church's job to pursue you. It's our job to pursue the church. And so I think I had more grace in that. And especially with coming from the background is there is going to be church hurt, and there is going to be people that do you wrong and people that don't understand you and they don't see you. But your job is to go there to be equipped and to be strengthened. Is there times where there's abuse taking place and you need to leave and find something else? Yes. But it was like the church was going to a body of believers where they are gathering to worship our God. I was not going to cut out of my life, and I was not going to penalize my own walk with God where I could be strengthened and equipped and strengthened in general because of what somebody else falsely represented him as. In the same way, like I had mentioned, when I had sabotaged my job over in Montana and was down in Southern California, my pastor said I wasn't Christian. And it's like, it's not his job to determine that. It's God's job. And he can take it to mean he can convict me. And obviously he did, because I repented in the ways that I needed to. And I sought forgiveness where it was needed. So I was navigating all that. I'm starting this marketing agency, and a lot of things need to happen for what's about to happen. So I ended up with a client with Sayroar Studios. It was a movie production. They were doing something called the Goldfish Project, and they were currently building a team and rallying funding for this movie. And I had met somebody who was also starting marketing, and we were kind of freelancing together and doing stuff together, but him and I just constantly butt heads, and we just did stuff differently. He was not a Christian and was very just did stuff different. So our last client together that we were going to do stuff with was the Sayroar Studios production. His name was Jeff. And as we were sitting down with Jeff, I just decided, I was like, I'm not going to do this. Well, where the enemy could have sabotaged that, he didn't, because I end up going to the gym, and I'm at the gym, and I end up in a yoga class, which I know yoga is typically associated with Kundalini and all the stuff. And it's one of those things that I look back and I could never get into yoga. I would try to get into yoga and it just would not stick. There was no interest, no level. But I remember walking into the back room and there's this yoga class, and I kind of tried doing the stretches and I was just like fumbling through it. And by the end of it, I was talking to the yoga instructor and I was telling her this vision that God had put on my heart and that I was in marketing and all the stuff that I was doing. And she's like, I'm actually the lead storyboard artist for this movie production company. You should come and talk to the director. And I was like, oh, is that how that works? So I ended up going, and she's like, well, I'll get together a time. I'll find a time for him to meet with you, and I'll just let you know. Well, then a couple days later, it's funny to say what I did in this time. I had fake eyelashes on and I had braces on. And so I already have a really young looking face. I looked like a child. I had and my braces had snapped this tooth. So I had a missing tooth. It was my first time ever having fake eyelashes, and half of them fell out and I didn't have a fill. So I had all these spider leg looking the eyelashes. But this girl, she messages me and she's like, tomorrow's Coffee and Concepts. And it's this big hub where a bunch of really wealthy people, they opened a coffee house and have offices, and they have coffee and concepts where people come tell their ideas and then they buy them, or they don't buy them, they use them and profit off of them in their own business. At the time, no one knew that was what's going on. And so I was like, yeah, I'll go. And she's like, yeah, the director might be there. Well, I go with my missing tooth and my eyelashes looking all bad. I've got bags down to here because I haven't slept. I had 2.5 hours, 3 hours of sleep the night before. And I get there and I just kind of sit through and I just go through this meeting. And then at the end, she's like, oh, the director's right here. You guys should go in a meeting. And I get in this meeting and my tongue was frozen. I had no idea what to say to him. He was like, what's your experience? And all of my understanding in business and marketing and brand, just out the window. Could not say a thing. It was like my tongue was bit. And I was just like, he's like, well, what do you want to do with your life? I was like, one of the greatest quotes I've heard recently is to go from one failure to the next with the same enthusiasm. That's courage. And I just was so, and he just kind of looked at me like, what is wrong with this girl? But quickly ends the meeting, and then is looking at the storyboard artist like, why are you wasting my time? And rushes me out of the room. But in the process of rushing me out of the room, because it was awkward, he was like, I have this movie production company. Do you want to come to it? And I was like, yeah. He's like, well, we can see if you're going to be a fit there, already knowing that I had bombed this interview. And so I end up, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to that. There's no way. Well, fast forward like a week and a half, 2 weeks. And the day of the movie production, the lady that I'm living with, that I'm nannying for, calls me and says, you're off today. Like, don't even come home, which was really weird because she always needed my help for something. And she's just like, don't come home. Not that, like, I don't want you to just be home. Like, go do something. And I was like, okay. And then, my friend, Magda, she worked at the Macy's, and I went to go visit her, and she did my makeup. And I was like, okay, well, I've got makeup done. I just got new shoes for free because my mom gave me this little like Fox wallet, and I went and switched it out. So I have a new outfit, I have new shoes, or I have a nice outfit, I have new shoes, I have my makeup done, and I have nothing to do tonight. And then I get a notification that the Sarah Studios thing's going on, and I was like, okay, like, I guess I'll just go. And I end up going. I'm sitting in my car before I go into this event, and I record a video hyping myself up, like, you're going to go in there and you're going to do good. You're not going to embarrass yourself, and like affirmations in the camera. It was so silly, and I get super red watching it. Anyway, I go in, it's September 21st, and I just remember, and I share the date rape situations, and I share the tension with boys and how they were my drug and the camming, because I had just gotten to a point where I had lamented to God and cried out to God and said, I'm done. Like, I need a full 1 year of celibacy, like anything more than a year. Like, I need to establish a foundation of friendship before I marry anyone. So even if I was to meet the next person, like, I need at least a year with them to know that that's who you have for them, and so that I know that they can honor you. And so I was so dead serious on this. I was tired of being broken. I was tired of being beat up. Like, I'd gone through that serious deliverance thing very recently where I was going downhill, and the lady like did the shit thing. Like, that was super fresh. The date rapes were super fresh. The neighbor dying was fresh. Like, I just felt beat up and so exhausted and terrified that I was like, I'm going to trust you, God. Now I'm at the Sarah Studios production, and mind you, while this is going on, I'm living with this really wealthy lady that goes to a country club that has a lot of younger guys that are my age that are there, and they just weren't my type. As far as, I just didn't click with that type, and it's nothing wrong with them. That just wasn't my personality. And I remember walking into Sarah Studios, and I watched a boy walk across the back, and it was like there were all these people in the crowd, and it was like I just saw him and spotted him, and I instantly was like, God, that looks like one of the boys from the country club. I'm not interested in him. I don't want him. Like, I was like, but he's standing out to me, so like, keep us away from each other. Like, I immediately remember saying something like that. And so I ended up going and talking to people, and it was like every conversation just fell flat. It was, normally I could keep the conversation and I can network really well. I could not get a single conversation to stick. I couldn't get anyone to engage with me. So I was like, okay. I ended up running into this one kid that I had met 2 days before, and his name's Aaron. I'm talking to Aaron, and this boy that I just watched walk up in the background comes up, and he starts talking. And he's talking about how he has a business, and he's using Christianese. Like, there was an open door, an open window. And at this point, I'm so hungry for another Christian that understands business that's my age, because most of the Christians that understood business that was my age, I'm like 20 years old at the time, were 25, 27, 28, had kids, and it just two different lifetimes. So I really wanted someone that either I could look up to that did have kids and was running a business and had Christian ethics in their business, or was level with me. So I was just like, this boy's my age, he understands business, and he's at a movie. Like, these could be my people. I was so excited to find community. Like, I was like, okay, I need to meet this man's wife. Like, where's she at? Let me talk to her. Like, I don't even care about you, but can I just know your wife? And so we're all talking. Another guy comes up, his name's Tyler, and he starts talking, and we start talking about like Socrates and Plato and business and ethics and all this stuff. And my brain's just firing off like, oh my gosh, people can keep up with me. Like, we're talking about Bible, and then we're talking about philosophy, and like, this is so cool. And now we're talking about business. And they're like, well, actually, so Tyler's like, actually, my business partner and I, between the two of us, we own 4 businesses. And he's like, do you want to come back to the arcade? And I was like, what do you mean the arcade? And I was born and raised in this town. I had no idea there was like an arcade in downtown Coeur d'Alene. And he's like, yeah, it's just right around the corner. So we walk over there. And on the way walking over there, they have this huge, like, a photographer with a booth and stuff out front. And the two guys, Colton was the boy's name that was making the Christianese comment, and Tyler, they start they take pictures together. And I almost jumped in. And that's like one of my biggest regrets, is I didn't jump in on this photo. But we walk back to the arcade, and we end up on the roof. And it's important because, like, downtown Coeur d'Alene has this huge, massive resort. It's like a 5-star resort. Everyone comes for the resort, and it's just acres and acres of really pristine parks and like really high class, like flowers everywhere, and they do really good job taking care of the landscaping. Well, it butts up against this massive mountain called Tubbs Hill, which is butts up against a massive lake. So it's this beautiful lake town. Anyone can walk Tubbs Hill, so it's gorgeous. And we're standing on this building, looking at Tubbs, looking at the waterfall, looking at the lake, looking at the resort, and 360 of the entire downtown. And I'm just amazed at how beautiful it is because everything's lit up. They have got beautiful lighting, and I'm sitting here just like, okay, Colton, like, where is your wife? Like, who are you? What's your story? You're young and you're in this building, like this high class, like why with an arcade, like, who are you? What is this? And I just was genuinely a very curious person, and I couldn't get him to talk because Tyler kept talking. And so Aaron ends up coming up late, just bulldozes through the group of us and grabs Tyler's attention and pulls him aside. And we joke he was our wingman because that gave me time to talk to Colton. And as I'm asking Colton all these questions, I was like, well, like, how'd you come up here? Like, how did God get you here? And he's like, oh, he just led me. And I was like, but like, how? Like, how do you know that God led you here? And he's like, oh, the name of my wife's on the building. And I was like, where's your wife at? Like, can I meet her? And he's like, oh, no, I've never met her. And I was like, what do you mean you've never met her? And so at this point, we're now like kind of walking down the stairs. And I remember looking down, and I was so thankful I was looking down because the facial expression on my face would have given away so much. And he's like, oh, well, like, I was like, what's the name on the building? And he goes, Roxy. And in my brain, my stage name was Roxy. And so how am I going to tell this good Christian boy that I also just confessed to God that I'm never going to be with someone, at least for a year, that I may possibly be his wife? But then what thought in my head was like, Jesus pursued the church. And so if he really is from God and I am Roxy, he needs to pursue me. And so I quickly got out of there. And he'll tell you the story, like when you hear it from his perspective, that's how he vetted girls. So he wouldn't waste his time, God had already confirmed the name, and a story I'll tell you here in a minute, but God had already confirmed the name of who Roxy was. And so he would just say, my wife's name is Roxy. And the girls would get discouraged and they would walk away and they'd stop pursuing him. And he said when he saw my face, you looked deflated and defeated. It's because I had to now tell him like this thing that I was healing from. Anyway, so 2 weeks goes by, and within that 2 weeks, I'm at the coffee shop, and Aaron, that same gentleman I met at Saywar Studios and that was kind of the wingman on that roof, he comes up and he sees me in the inspect page of a website. I was working on some homework for an internship in marketing I was doing, and he was like, oh my gosh, you need to come market for Colton. Like, you need to come talk to Colton. And I was like, great, God, if Colton's from you, like, this is you opening a door that I'm just going to walk obediently to. I'm not going to like manipulate my way in there. And so I go to the arcade, and Colton's nowhere to be found. And so I paid for a game of VR. And as I was playing virtual reality, because he had these we had stations of VR, so you could rent the station, and it was like the highest class VR there was. This was like 2018, so before the Oculus was even out. And I rent my time. I'm on the game, and I purposely tried breaking it to see if I could get Colton to come out of the woodworks. And I couldn't break it. Like they're like, oh, we could fix it. Like, Colton's not here. So then I actually tried playing, and I broke it for real. And I was like, oh, well, this is not fun. So then they're like, oh, well, Colton's in his room. And I was like, he lives here? Like, what do you mean he lives here? That's so cool. And end up talking to him. He comes down, and I remember like in the Cinderella stories, like if you're looking at the staircases and you're looking up, instead of Cinderella at the top of the stairs, it was him on the phone with his mom and like looking down at me, making eye contact, and like gets off the phone. He comes and talks to our group, and I was not volunteering my services. I was so quiet. And Aaron goes, Colton, you need to meet Kearsy. She's such a good marketer and blah, blah. And so he's like, I'll get your number. So he gets my number. Now, second time he's met me in a short time. He types in Chrissy, doesn't even lock his phone screen on his iPhone, and sticks the phone in his pocket. And I was like, this boy is not serious. He's not going to get my number. He just lost it. Like, God, he ain't going to pursue me. I'm still going to the military. See you later. And while we're talking, and I kind of realized that, I look at the time and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go get my kid. Well, the reason that that's important is I had been done lying. And the reason I had stopped lying is, like I had mentioned before, I used to just lie and words would come out of my mouth and I couldn't control it. The way that God broke that habit in my life before I was ever a Christian was I had a roommate named Roxy who was dating a Colton and got married to a Colton and is now still married to Colton. But Roxy lived with me when I was 16 or 15, and she was like, dude, why do you lie all the time? And I was like, I don't know. And I explained the situation to her, and she was like, well, I'll just be that accountability. Like, if you feel like you're lying, just tell me that you lied and we'll create a habit. And she did. And so I was so serious about getting rid of lying, especially after the whole wake of what happened at my high school and the thing with the Dan situation. And so I just was like, okay, I'll do that. So when I was standing before Colton and I said, I got to go get my kid, yes, I was late to the bus stop almost, but by me saying I have to go get my kid, I beat myself up because I was like, why would I lie? Why would I say something like that? Like, what's wrong with me? Well, come to find out, one of the confirmations Colton needed was that she needed to have a kid. So I had a kid, but it was a nanny kid. So it wasn't the actual, like, I gave birth to a child. But anyway, so that was something that was really interesting. I end up leaving, and then that week or within a week or two, I'm at the Transform Bible study I told you about. I leave the Transform Bible study, and I just hear the voice of God, that still small voice, go down to Tubbs. And it was like just this subtle thought, this peace that came over me. And I started arguing with God, and I was like, God, if I go down to Tubbs, I'm going to end up at the arcade, and I'm going to try like manipulating my way with Colton. And I was like, we already know that that's a temptation, a drug. I'm not doing it. I'm not interested. And as I'm just in my head arguing with him, I'm kind of driving, going on autopilot, and I'm down at Tubbs Hill. Coeur d'Alene's a really small town, like one side to the other side. And so I get out of Tubbs Hill, and it's a really big park. And I start walking, and I was like, God, you told me to come down here. I know that it wasn't, like, I don't think it was for Colton. So I'm just going to be obedient to what you have. And then I'm out. Like, I'm going home. And so I start walking. And there's this big gazebo in between the parks and the field. And there's a man in the gazebo. He's got his hands in his head, and he's got a cigarette in hand, and he's just super overwhelmed. The 6-pack right there, cigarettes on the side, a bag next to him, and there's a homeless guy sleeping behind him. Homelessness is pretty popular for a lot of other cities. Coeur d'Alene, it was not popular. In Spokane, Washington, where everyone went, like that, it was super popular over there because drugs were legal and everyone went under the bridge, and that was a partying style. But that's where the homeless went. It was not in Coeur d'Alene. And I wasn't against that because I had just got done doing a streets ministry, going out and praying with people that were homeless, like very familiar with that crowd. But I remember it stood out to me, and it's important later why I mentioned that detail. But I see this guy, and I was like, God, it's 9:00 at night. It's dark. It's fall. It's creepy. Like, I'm not going to go talk to that guy. So I keep walking, and I run into this lady walking a dog, and she is like, talk to her a little bit. And I was like, well, can I pray with you? And she was hesitant. I was like, well, are you a woman? I was like, are you a Bible reader? And she's like, no. I was like, are you a woman of faith? And she's like, yeah, I am. And I was like, cool, can I pray with you? And so she let me pray with her. I leave, and as I was going back to my car, I just did not, it was like I had a 50% peace return. So there was still 50% missing, and I was like, God, what is this? And as I'm now walking back, I'm walking past the tennis courts towards the gazebo that I had to pass to get to where I was, and I see this man again, and I was like, God, if you want me to talk to him, he needs to look up. Like, I know I can't put stipulations on you, and that's not how this works, but I need to know if I'm going to go be a dummy. Like, clarify it for me. And as soon as I say he needs to look up, the guy looks up and looks at me. He doesn't realize he looks up to me in hindsight. We end up having a conversation about it, but he does. So I end up going up to him, and I'm like, hey, like, what's your name? Are you doing okay? Like, you look like you're having a really rough day. And he goes, I have no idea where I'm at. He's like, I'm from Montana. We're from Kalispell, and I came here on a job site. I only know this because of the city hall. We got a permit there, but the crew that I was with, the daughter's 20, or she's 25. She's pregnant. She's doing meth, and the dad's doing it too. And they told me I have like 3 minutes to get my stuff and get out because I protested against it, and my direct deposit doesn't go through till Thursday. And I was like, okay, well, knowing I have a background in this stuff, there's some omitting in the story. So I obviously tried to determine, like, is he actually a safe person? What's his drug of choice? And is the gun disassembled? Because if you've got an AR in your bag, like, what does that look like? And so we were talking, and I was like, well, are you a Bible reader? Like, and he's like, I just got a new Bible. I just put the tabs in my Bible. I just started reading it. And so to me, it was like, you're living in your mire, you're living in the muck and the weeds, and God's pulling the weeds out of your life right now. And he's getting ready to bring you to what he has for you. So he's pulling you out of that bad circumstance. Makes total sense to me. So I was like, okay, well, you have nowhere to sleep. And I'm looking over, and I can see the arcade, like the street that the arcade's on, like behind us. And I was like, can you just show me that the gun's like taken apart? And so he opens the bag, and it's obviously disassembled. I was like, I think I have a place that you can stay. I need to go talk to them. Will you give your gun to him? And he's like, oh yeah, like no problem. Totally fine. And I did find out the guy did like his fair share of pills, but he wasn't like into opium or wasn't a meth addict, wasn't going to be some weird guy. He even told me more of his story. Like, he was in a drive-by shooting. He grew up in Portland, Oregon, and he got shot as a kid. I think he said he got shot in the cheek or the shoulder, but he lived. And so it was just like, to me, God obviously preserved your life for a reason, and this is really cool, and I love hearing your testimony. So let me go see. I know another Christian. And so I went to the arcade, and I walked in, and I was like, is Colton here? And Haley's like, she was the front desk lady, just, yeah, I can go get him. Colton comes up, and this is the third time he's ever had an interaction with me, and I just, million miles an hour, there's this boy that was shot in the face as a kid, and now he's here, and he was stuck in this, and Colton just looks at me, and he's like, I can pray for him. And my first response was like, you pray for him? Like, what kind of Christian are you? Don't you have a couch that you can give him or something? Like, you live here? And so I just instantly in my mind, I'm like, this is not a God-honoring Christian. He won't give his home up to him, which now I'm like, I see the logic of where you were at. But in my brain, it was just like, everything belongs to the kingdom of God. And so we start walking out of the arcade, and Colton's like, yeah, I guess so. And this man walks up to us. And the reason that I say this is at this time, Northern Idaho was predominantly white. Like, you had people that were Black and people that were Mexican and stuff, but it was predominantly white. So when you saw someone that had really pretty olive skin or dark skin and blue eyes, it stood out. Not in like people might say it traces, but it just wasn't. This is how it was. It just wasn't normal. And so to me, I always thought it was beautiful. I think people with dark skin have beautiful skin. And I remember we were walking down the road to go towards the waterfall that Luke is now sitting at. And this man with dark, beautiful skin, he comes up. He has bright eyes, like super bright eyes. It's almost, and I say bright eyes because he was glowing. And I don't know like how to explain that in any other way, even though he had a hood, a beanie, and like full on decked out. But he just had this glowing presence about him in the darkness. Like, that's the best way that I could describe it. He hands us a 10 Commandments card. Now, I just like had mentioned, people don't evangelize downtown Coeur d'Alene because it's a bunch of, Coeur d'Alene's predominantly a tourist. It's wealthy. There's not much need for street evangelism there in the same way it is in Spokane. So most of the people that do street evangelism go to Spokane. He walks up and hands us this pamphlet with the 10 Commandments and says, you're going to need this, specifically to Colton. The reason why this is important is because when Colton always wanted to do evangelism, he would like follow Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron and stuff like that. He just had no idea what to say. And so he was in his head as we're walking to Luke, like, God, I don't know what to say. I don't know what I'm going to respond to this guy. Like, how do I minister to him? Like, this is so out of my ballpark. And I'm like dragging him into it. He's never really met me. And this man walks up with the 10 Commandments and gives him like just a download of it, the way that Ray Comfort used to evangelize. And so he was like, okay. Well, the reason that man is important is I'm now walking with the man that, spoiler, it's going to be my husband, to go and do ministry together. And the man that handed us the 10 Commandments was in the back of the coffee shop when I met Aaron. I'm like almost positive was in the back of the gym when I met that girl to go to that Sarah section. Like, everywhere that I needed to be to make a connection to be meeting Colton that night, this man was in the background. And I'm excited to find out when I end up in eternity and I'm like talking to God, if that man was also the homeless guy sleeping behind Luke, because there were so many things where it just would make sense if that's what it was. And it's a cool factor to the story when you see how it plays out. But we go up to Luke and we're talking to Luke, and Colton doesn't give him a place to stay, but he gives him this Armor of God coin he has. And there's this group, the Armor of God is like their medallion, and they'll go in and they'll fly into places that Bibles are not supposed to be, and they'll like ride in under dead bodies and bring Bibles and stuff. And the guys that they use their ex-military experience to go in and to infiltrate these places so that the gospel can be heard. And one of the people that founded that group gave Colton's grandmother this coin, and she gave it to Colton. And so this was super important to him, super, 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 super important to him. As we're going and talking to Luke, he takes this sentimental coin and gives it to Luke. And so to me, I was like, okay, that's sacrificial. Like, that's not giving your couch, but that's a pretty big deal. My uncle ends up giving Luke a place to stay. Luke stays there for like a day and then ends up getting home and stuff. But on the process to driving Luke, Colton drove Luke to my uncle's house so I didn't have to drive him. And I led the way. And then when we got out, I was talking to Colton, and at this point, I'm curious because Roxy's his future wife. He doesn't know that I know that I used to be the name Roxy. This supernatural thing has happened. We keep consistently being brought together. Like, why? What's going on? Where is God in all this? And so I just asked him, I was like, who's Roxy? And he just starts talking, and I'm like, this is going to be a 3-hour conversation, like flat out, this is gonna be a long conversation. And in the romance movies, they all go to diners. And so I was like, you want to go get some pie? There was like a Denny's opened up around the corner. And so we went to Denny's, and our Denny's is high class. Some towns don't have a high class Denny's. Ours was a pretty good Denny's. And anyway, that's the place everyone goes after they leave the bars, after the concerts. Like, that's the after party that's more laid back and everyone's getting their food. And so we're sitting there and like just vibrant, full life. Colton's like, doesn't understand why I'm asking. He thinks I'm just a girl that's curious and wants to know his testimony. He starts telling me how he got the name Roxy. And really kind of in short, when he was 2 years old, his dad and mom had been divorced, or in the process of divorce. And his dad had these goofy keychains right here. So these goofy keychains were actually on Goofy's keyring, and Colton would be like, well, why do you have these goofy keychains? And Colton was like, or Goofy was like, because they remind me of you, you're goofy. And so then Colton would be like, oh, well, you're goofy. And so they would go back and forth and tell each other they're goofy. And that just became a thing. Like, we still call Goofy Goofy. And it's Goofy in the phone. Like, Colton's called him that. It's always been this thing, and it just hasn't been dropped. And it started out because of these key rings. Well, it's interesting because that's when I said he was 2, he was 4. Colton's 4 years older than me. So this would have happened before I was conceived, when my parents supposedly met me and had that one night stand and all that stuff. So, and I was supposed to be aborted. And that's why that's important, is because before I was conceived, before my parents met me as an accident, God had started this process and started what he was going to confirm the name of his future wife with. And so as Colton's about 19, 20, 21, he just got done going through an internship at his local church, and he's working with Young Life. And he had 3 separate people at 3 separate times, not knowing each other, but very quickly, rapidly, back to back, say, you need to pray for your future wife, make a list about her, and just keep praying for her. And so he did that. And one of the days he got a call from Goofy to come and house sit, and Goofy gave him these keychains with this house key on it and was like, hey, will you come house it? Well, Colton gets called into work, and as he's leaving work, he is just dying of thirst. So he stops at the Boise Whole Foods, and as he's there, he goes to pick up an Honest Tea. And then as he picks it up, he's like, he's like, I like this flavor. He's like, but he sets it down because he found another flavor he liked a little bit more. And this other flavor that he liked a little more, he went to go pick it up. He's walking back with it to go buy it because he's dying of thirst. And he hears like this still small voice, and he just gets hit with this like fear. If I don't go back and grab that first one, something's going to happen. Like, go back and grab the first one is what he heard. And so he went back, he grabbed that first drink, he checks out, he goes home, back to Goofy's house. He's playing a video game. He turns off the video game, switches to a movie. And as he's switching to the movie, he looks down and he sees the bottle, and it still has like this much tea in it. And he's like, why is there so much tea in it? So he picks it up and he's analyzing it, and it says Roxanne Hoffman on the bottle. And he's like, okay, that's interesting. Like, that's my name. Cool. But like, Hoffman's my name. And anyway, doesn't think anything of it, goes to bed that night, and he's praying for his future wife. And he's like, God, who is she? Do I need what do I need to know about her? Like, does she even have a name? And he hears Roxanne's her name. And he's like, that's like, I just saw it on a bottle. Like, can you tell me how, can you prove it to me? Because the way my husband is he's it takes a long time for him to make a decision, but once he's made the decision, there's no turning back. Like, that is what it is. I've made this decision. This is where we're at in it. And so he decides that that's what he's going to do. And he's like, if you're going to prove it to me, God, like, I'm all in, I'll be obedient. And over the next 2 weeks, he goes back to working at the St. Luke's Hospital, and he's an inpatient. So it's random patients that come in. If it's a red file, like first time they're doing intake, he needs to take information. All the people at the register try to avoid getting red files because it's like 30, 40 minutes intake versus like 5-10 minutes on a green file. Mm-hmm. He kept stuck with all the red files, and every single one of them was a Roxy or a Roxanne. And he was like, this isn't a normal name. That's not a thing. Like, why are they doing this? Goofy's a mailman. And so Goofy, there ended up being a thing where he got on a new route or in a situation, and he's saying Roxy's. And Colton starts bringing it to Goofy, and Goofy's like, well, now that you say that. And one of the people Goofy met on his route is a name by Tony. And Tony is a radical, on fire, like, you want to hear supernatural stories and the way God's intervened. He's done some amazing things, and they've just seen the most supernatural things. And so Goofy met him and got in touch. Goofy ended up getting Tony and Colton in touch, and the 3 of them kind of had this small discipleship group for a while. And Tony was like, I totally believe it. Like, God is telling you that's the name of your future wife. And a bunch of other things happened. Well, over the next couple of years, Tony became a voice for Colton, because the final confirmation for Colton was okay, he's like, God, it's been like 2 weeks. Like, I'm driving and they're building a Roxbury juice, and the last road I see is Hoffman Lane. And he's like, maybe I'm looking because once you see the symbol, you're looking for it almost because it's exciting. And he's like, but can you just confirm it to me? And he's sitting at a red light. And he's like, can you just give me something else? Like, am I supposed to look for Roxy? Is her middle name Roxy? Like, do I need to go look on Facebook or Tinder for all these Roxannes and Roxys? And he's like, what's a descripting factor about her? Like, does she have hair? Like, what kind of hair does she have? Like, Eddie hears the radio starts skipping on the song Red, 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 Red. And it was a country song. And it was one of the fresher country songs at the time. And so he just kind of like looks at the radio. He's stuck at a still red light. And then he's like, it hit me like a freight train. And I just had this download of information of in the Goofy movie, Goofy's son Max falls in love with Roxanne. And he was like, that's it. Like, that's what it is. Like, God has brought this between my dad and I. This was special to him. Him and his dad have kind of more of a playful relationship and less of a serious relationship. Even though his mom and dad were divorced, they never took it out on Colton. It was just whenever he wanted to go to his dad's house, that was the fun house. So this was more of a serious thing in the relationship that God was moving and doing. And Colton was like, all right, Roxanne's her name. Well, Tony also being like a mentor in this trio of them, over the next couple of years, Colton would get impatient. And so he went on Tinder and he was looking for Roxy or Roxanne and with red hair. And as he's going there, he finds this girl. Her name's not Roxy or Roxanne. And he had kind of convinced himself. He's like, well, maybe her middle name's Roxy or Roxanne. And he ends up going on this date with this girl. They go to he was a second to a wedding. And then after that, they're going to a movie. And as they're going to the movie, it was Blind, or Don't Breathe, the one with the blind guy that gets his house broken into by the kids. They were going to that movie. And he's like, I'm not a horror movie person, not really even interested in thrillers. And they're on their way in there, and he gets a text. He looks down on his phone. It's from a number he doesn't know, and it says Roxanne. As he's with, like, next to this girl he's on a date with that he knows he shouldn't be on a date with. And he was like, well, God, you got my attention. So he puts the phone in his pocket, a little bit concerned. Well, then goes and sits down, and the main character, her name is Rocky, which is Roxanne. And the movie, so he's like, the main character's name's Roxanne. She has a troubled life. She has a kid that she's taking care of that's not hers. I just got a text from someone saying Roxanne. I have no idea who it is. Fast forward, Tony calls Colton after the date and is like, what were you doing today? And he's like, well, I was just at the mall and I heard the song Roxanne playing over the speaker and the Holy Spirit told me to text you, Roxanne. And so I did. And when it came through Colton's phone, the name Tony didn't associate with his phone number for some reason. And so they start talking about the movie, and just after prayer and like discussion, they were like, Roxy's going to have a hard life. And so that was one of the things to add to the list, is she was going to have a bad background. And that was one of the things that led to she needed to have a kid, which I kind of shared that part with you. Mm-hmm. And so he's waiting. Well, kind of getting to how he ends up in Coeur d'Alene is he got laid off from his job at St. Luke's, and he had an opportunity to keep it. He chose not to because there's other people that needed the job more, and he didn't like it that much. And he's like, I've got like $15,000, $16,000 saved up. He's like, I can go do something. And at that time, he was really interested in VR. VR was very new technology. And there was a local arcade called VR1 that he was hanging out with a lot. And so he approached the owner at the time and was like, hey, can we franchise? And that owner was not interested in franchising. He didn't want to. He just wanted to do his own thing. And so Colton was talking to Goofy, and Goofy's like, well, why don't you look up in Coeur d'Alene? Like, your uncle lives up there. And he's like, okay, like, I'll look it up. So he Googles Coeur d'Alene VR, and what pops up out of Coeur d'Alene VR is it comes up Coeur d'Alene Vocational Rehabilitation General Manager Roxanne England. And he was like, I'm going, like, I'm on my way. He goes to get a U-Haul, and as he goes to get the U-Haul, and this is important too, gets the second size down, and he gets there to get it, and the U-Haul guy goes, we are actually out of these. Sorry about that, sir, but I have this one. It's bigger, but we'll cover it. It's on the house. And Tony ended up pointing this out for Colton later on, because it ties into the building he gets, is you think you needed this much space, but you really needed this much space, and I'm going to provide the difference for you. Like, you didn't dream big enough, but I'm going to dream big enough for you, and I'm going to pay for that difference. And it's impactful because when Colton went, he would not have been able to leave on the timing that he did when he did if he got the smaller U-Haul, because he filled every inch, even the car that was towed behind. He put his last box in that car and then the last box in the U-Haul seat next to him. So it was like he thought he needed something, and God was like, no, you need this, and we're going to go with this. So then he continues on. He's moving up here. He gets up to Coeur d'Alene, and his mom had made a joke, and she's like, don't be going and marrying some girl now. Like, I can't be losing you. And one of the things that really pushed him was he had a dream, and in that dream, God had said, you've got to move. And so he was like, okay, I'll go. And he gets up here. He no idea where he's staying. He's staying with some family in a trailer in their backyard, and that one of the family members is like, you need to just get out of the house. Like, just go see stuff. And so he starts going downtown, and as he's downtown, he goes to the local toy shop, and then as they're leaving from the toy shop, him and his cousin, he gets stuck on a road that is important because there's no one ever stuck on this road. Like, there's always a continual flow of traffic. It's never backed up. But he gets stuck, and he looks up, and he sees this Roxy arch. Actually, I'll see if I can show you. So that's the building right there. He sees that arch, and on the arch, it says Roxy. And he was like, okay. And he looks down and he sees it's for sale or for rent or for lease. And so he calls and he's like, wants to know any details. And they're like, he's got $15,000, $14,000 at this point. And to start this arcade, he needs about 1,000 square feet. And they're like, well, it's 11,000 square feet because this little building extended half a block and it was on top and had other buildings smushing against it. So it looks small, but as you get into it, it's bigger. Anyway, so he's looking at it and he's like, they're like, it's 13 or 15,000, something like that. It was super expensive. And he's like, I can't pay for that. Well, Tony calls him out of the blue and Tony's like, hey, what's going on? He's like, well, I found a building. It says Roxy on it. And Tony's like, Colton, that is your building. God sent you up there. You need to make an offer on that building and know that God's going to provide. And he's like, Colton's like, well, I don't need that much space. He's like, well, he did it with the U-Haul. He's going to do it again. Like, he's going to fill the space. Spoiler, he does fill the space. What ends up happening is Colton goes and he's like, okay, my offer one is I'll do 1,000 month one, 1,000 month two, or 2,000 month two, 3,000 month three, and so on through $12,000. And that'll slowly get me to where I need to go. So he submits that letter of intent with the lawyer's help or with the realtor's help. And the owner and the realtor come back and say no. And they offer him $26,000 less than what his offer was to get in for a full year. So they said, you can have this 11,000 square foot building lakefront property. We want 1,000 month one, two, and three. You need to put 3,000 down and then we'll slowly increment up. And so Colton was like, okay, like this is unheard of. I'll take it. So it was just God meeting him where he needed to be. So he gets in, he's open, and he opens in the middle of February. What's really funny about this, and you see God's sense of humor, is the day that he opened, I had this sudden inclination and drive to try VR because I had tried it at a friend's house in Montana, and I was looking and Googling for VR, could not find VR anywhere. So I drove all the way to Spokane with a friend to go to VR, and I was looking at my like metadata for like flashbacks, and it was like the day that Colton opened this arcade, I went to another arcade to try VR, and so you just see how that was maybe working. And even funnier is that other person that I mentioned to you that I had some tensions with, that I was doing marketing with, had picked up Colton as a client and was doing Colton's website for his new arcade. And so I had even joined a girl that was locally doing politics, and she was going and doing door knocking, and I knew nothing about politics, and I was going and doing door knocking with her just for the experience. And she's like, you need to meet this kid. She's like, you really remind me of this kid that has a business downtown. Like, you need to meet him. Didn't connect any of those things until after I had met Colton. And so Colton is now in this building. He has been waiting for Roxy. Every time he's kind of wandered off the path, God brought a substantial breadcrumb, and there's more, but for the sake of time, I won't go into all the details. He's waiting for Roxy, and now I'm Roxy. We're sitting at Denny's. He's telling me everything, and I'm like, I'm not telling him, God. Like, I can't tell that. Like, nope, I'm not ready. Like, I don't believe it. Like, he's not also like, he's cute, but he's not like my type. But I'm also like maybe not his type. Like, I don't know. And this drunk guy stumbles up to our table at Denny's, like full on falling over, and goes, do you know what the powerhouse of the cell is? And Colton's like, and I didn't know it, but I kept saying mitochondria, but I couldn't talk again. It was like another tongue bite, and I was just like kind of looking at them, watching what's going to happen. And Colton's like, I don't know, like caught off guard. And the drunk guy goes, you're supposed to be one of them. Well, Colton's like, wait. Like, no, there. He's like, that's not the powerhouse of the cell. And so he pulls up the laminin gene. Do you know what the laminin gene is? Mm-mm. So the laminin gene is it's a molecule that atoms cannot replicate themselves or reproduce themselves without this molecule, and it's in the shape of a cross. And so they call it the laminin gene, but the reason Colton pulls it up, and it's like a picture of the laminin gene under a microscope with the cross and Jesus on the cross next to it. And at the top of it, it says, for we all come together as one. And it was, I think, either in Corinthians or Colossians, it's a verse talking about, like, basically referring to the Trinity and the doctrine of the Trinity, that like the three of us are one. And in my naive brain, I'm like, that's not for him. Like, this is because it was God being like we're all together as one, and like that unity and sanctity of marriage. And so I was just like million miles an hour. I just went through this traumatic thing, and all this stuff happened, and blah, blah, blah. And my name was Roxy. And he just is looking at me like, I heard every other word you just said. But I heard Roxy. I heard that come through. And he kind of was just like, huh. We stayed at Denny's until the sun rose, and then we drove down to the lake, and we drove around the lake for a little bit, and I took him home, and we like pulled an all-nighter, and it was this cute romantic thing. And then he ghosted me for 3 days. Mind you, he works 11-hour days at his arcade and is pretty much the only person that works there, and I just kept him up all night. So he was recovering, seeking counsel, praying, doing all that stuff. Well, God got my attention in that time because as I was impatient, because I've made my decision. You've already said go, let's go. And I need to take my time and make sure God said this person. And in the way that God made Adam, he placed Adam in the garden. He gave Adam a job. And then once Adam was doing that job, he brought her along. And so it wasn't, and Eve didn't have a name until sin had been committed, but he brought Eve along, and Eve became a helper. He was at, I think it's Eleazar is the term for it. She was meant to be there and an aid in the same way that Christ is for us. And so we were looking at that as God had brought Colton up from his home, had placed him, had put him to work, and as he was working out his purpose, brought me along in the perfect timing. It was like, okay, well, we see that in the same way we see it in Scripture. We see that when I was supposed to be an accident and I was supposed to be getting aborted, God was confirming in your life that I was supposed to be alive. Like, I fully 100% believe I was made for him. And so I am like, okay, well, what does obedience look like? It's not about if the lightning bolt strikes. We know we're supposed to be married. We know that this is what God has. We also know, though, I need to heal from my past and I need to be able to be right with God. And he's fully willing to respect that. And for me, that was how I knew he was the one. I had this idea or this rationality that if they ever pressed on me to sleep with them or to go against that, they were not from God. That was my, like, the way that Colton would vet with Roxy. If they pushed me in that way or wanted to, they might get it for a minute. And with some of them they did, but I was done with the relationship at that point. Colton, it was hands down, okay, whatever, like whether we're married or not. And so he ended up proposing in kind of a cute way. And there's all the details of that are in the book, but I end up taking my nanny kid to the bus stop. And after that, it's like 7 a.m. and I just feel like we should get married. It's October 19th. We met September 21st. So all this has happened in like less than a month, including the time of not talking to him. And so I just was like, I called the courthouse and found out how do you get married and all the stuff. And they have a place in Coeur d'Alene called the Hitching Post. And so I found out about that. And I prayed about it and I was like, hey, God, like, what does getting married look like? Because if like Colton wants me to move in with him, I can't go tell these girls that I am working with that I live with my boyfriend, but they can't live with their boyfriend. So like, what if we got secretly married and then a year to the date, we had an actual wedding? And so when people ask like, why are you living together? We're not sinning. We're still honoring you and we're still being patient to that. And I can still have my year of celibacy. And that was kind of something we had been talking about after he proposed. And so I just heard your wedding dress is at Goodwill and your rings are at the pawn shop. And I was like, well, we'll find out if that was you or me. So I called Colton and I woke him up and I was like, you want to get married today? I'm going to Montana this weekend to say bye to Elka and we can make it a honeymoon. And he's like, yeah, why not? And so we like went to courthouse, and sure enough, we even tried going to other spots on the way to the pawn shop to find rings, and our rings were at the pawn shop. My wedding dress was on a mannequin behind the front desk, and I had joked that night at Denny's because I mentioned I have family that's LDS, and one of the things that people make fun of the LDS for is that they get married instantly so that they can go make babies. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be like one of them where we just get married in an instant just to have kids or something like that. And I remember feeling a pit in my stomach. Well, my dad has 8 siblings, and one of his siblings, she was the only person that ever pulled me aside to look at wedding dresses as a little girl. Tammy was there. I hadn't seen Tammy in years, and Tammy was there with all of her kids at Goodwill the day that I got my wedding dress. So it was just this like God being like, you really think you're going to mock them? Like in my face thing. But anyway, get my wedding dress, we go get married. And the day that we got married, it was just all these little innuendos of God saying he was there. I don't know if you can see it. So that's us praying, but in between you can see here, this photo's not edited, but this photo's not edited, but the light that came in through went specifically around our hands while we were praying in the marriage. And this was exactly how it was printed out. My mom didn't put any edits on it. And it was just like a lot of our wedding photos had orbs of light around us. And it was like God saying, I've brought you guys together. And this is me with you. And so we took that. And then a couple days later, his family found out he got married without their consent or without telling them. And he's close with his family and is a good boy. And so this was this whole, like, it was a whole thing. It took a couple years to earn mom's trust, but we're there now. We get along now. And yeah, so anyway, long story short, we got married after knowing each other for 2 weeks because God said. We did wait the year, kind of. There was a couple times that we had slipped up, and one of the times we got pregnant, and so we named our kid Anointed Gift from God. His name's Messiah Matthew, and it's Anointed Gift from God is his name in translation because even though he wasn't planned, he was still a gift. Like I don't believe in accidents, especially after my story. And we got married October. In April, we ended up acquiring another business for free that filled the rest of the space in the business that he was talking about. Now, when I say free, he's like, we're going to merge all 3 businesses, become a new name. Here's the keys. Here's a $15,000 check to run the next month of bills. We're silent partners on the back end. And then a couple months later, they actually withdrew and they did get payment. So, but it was just like, you think you need this space and you really need more. And that building, the Roxy, we had a full apartment in. We were able to run the business, and the entire downstairs was turned into a laser tag arena, and the business was scaled. And so it was just really cool to see what God had put in place, God had anointed, and God had brought the blessing and the provision for. And yes, there was leaps of faith that we had to take. And yes, we looked crazy to some people, but God was there and he was in all the details, like even down to us in the honeymoon and the like really awkward, like our honeymoon cake was gas station Oreos and hot chocolate. And we recorded ourselves. I don't know if I'll ever release this, but we recorded ourselves and you could just see the awkwardness like off the camera. Like it was bad. But kind of like you said, is like we don't fight against each other. We fight next to each other. And shortly after getting married, we took a class called Brush Fires. And Brush Fires is a very in-depth personality assessment. Like you understand your temperaments and your motivated roles and your impact styles. And 8 weeks, like 90 minutes once a week, super intensive. And by the end of it, you take a DDM and you get your mission statement based on all your assessments and corporate prayer, and it's a thing. And when we took it, we found out that we are 100% perfectly opposite in all the best things. Like our characters and morals are the same as far as what we believe and what we follow. But knowing that I was made by God for Colton, we're 50% down the middle. My weaknesses are his strengths and his strengths are my weaknesses. And where a lot of couples would have normally clashed or butted heads or that would have driven them apart, that's actually been a superpower in our business, or just in our business and in our life and everything we've done, is because we know when to give it to the other person. And we found out early on, even in our responsibilities in our business and doing business together, was that things that I was supposed to be doing that were in my wheelhouse, he was doing and he was failing at. And so when we swapped those roles, we saw success. And it was one of those things that because we took that class or Brush Fires early on, which is now an online thing that anyone can take, we had language. Like, so for example, Colton is a really high analyst and he is a realist and he's here and now, and he's not necessarily a visionary where I'm a more higher futurist. And I can tell you, I can see the vision, I can communicate the vision, this is where we're going, but he's a here and now. So he's not necessarily the one that's in charge of the vision. I'll bring the vision and he says yes or no. So he'll filter it out and say, this is where we're going or this is where we're not going. Other people might have been tense in a relationship and been like, well, the man needs to give the vision, and the man needs to do this, and the man needs to do that. He's still the final say, and I'm still submissive to him in the way that a wife should be submissive to their husband. But just because the giftings are different doesn't mean that we can't operate in the way that God's intended us to. And so as a couple, we've seen that. And I could go on for another 2 hours about other supernatural things we've seen between now and then. I kind of already told you about a couple years ago, I did get deliverance. And so I saw all this stuff happen, and I'm still walking with God. And there's like no denying, like the enemy couldn't have been this detailed and this loving and this specific, like couldn't have taken credit for it even if he wanted to. And yet I still had oppression, even after having when my second son was born, was the walk to my deliverance. And so God needed to do things and bring things in my life. And I think that like that's a message I have for anyone that is like, sir, do I need deliverance or should I need deliverance? God's going to show you in the right time, and he's going to bring the person that can walk you through it in the right time. And the supernatural stuff, like the enemy just rips off God. Like God was supernatural before him. Like there's a saying, there ain't no high like the Most High. Like God is the Most High, and he has the best things for you. And he like supernaturally wrote my love story. And like I was biblically betrothed to my husband in a way that he anointed. He's like, you guys are meant to be for each other. Like here you guys go. And you were never coming home back to your hometown, but I brought your husband to your hometown in the same way like a man leaves his family to go find his wife. Like he did all of those things. And he even confirmed to Colton after like that 1 year I had mentioned, just like wrapping this up, is we started sleeping together again. And then we didn't go the full year because he was like, well, we're already done. I waited all this time and you're ready. And he went to church and he came home for that first Christmas. And while he was at church, it was the story of Mary and Joseph. And Joseph was told to wait 1 year before consummating because of Jesus's birth. And so that just got Colton's attention, was like, she needs a year. I need to give her a year. And so he came home and he repented and was like, I'm so sorry. We're going the rest of the year. And then we had that one slip up and I got pregnant with our son, which totally a gift. But it was just God got our attention in the midst of all of it. And he hasn't left us. He hasn't forsaken us. His love has endured forever. But it took us being bold. It took us going through and standing in our authority in him and saying, we surrender to you and we're going to let you write the story of our life. And so that's kind of the damaged goods to the new creation. And now we have businesses that we run together, and we have our kids, and we get to do life together. And I recommend everyone do it. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe little nuance here and there with your own approach, I suppose. I find a lot of people have shared in their own testimonies that God has this way of just meeting people where they are and in a way that's effective and impactful for them. I'm familiar with a lot of Muslims who are converted now to Christians where they found out about Jesus not through ministry or outreach, but because they had a dream. Another person who I did talk to was in the process of becoming a shaman. And the way that you become a shaman is by a current shaman coming to offer to teach you.
Yeah.
And so one night she was just in her basement saying, you know, this whole shamanism thing, nobody's offering to teach me. I don't really know what to do. And so she like hears a voice say, well, I'll teach you. And so
Wow.
God has this very, very intentional way of taking whatever it is we bring to the table, good, bad, or anywhere in between, and saying, I can make something of it. And I think that really that's one of the highlights of the idea behind Martyria is it does not matter what your history is. We don't know the reason, and we may not even know what to do with it, but God does.
Yeah.
And he does do something with it. And I think that that's one of the things that I would love to see the church do more of is recognize the fact that God asks us to partner with him in this way, right? Like it's all about the blood, and the blood is so important, right? What Jesus did on the cross is everything. That's it. That rescues us from death. It allows us to no longer be separated from God because of the sin. Like we're forgiven and we have this connection. We have this unity that we can experience. But God doesn't say, and that's it. That's how it works. He goes, no, no, no. It's my blood and your testimony. And he could do it himself. He doesn't need our testimony, right? But he chooses to have us partner with him, which is amazing. And one of the things I've realized, even in the episodes that I've done so far of this podcast, is there is no Christian who feels like they have nothing to offer God when they understand that he is asking for us to use our testimony for his glory. It's like, what can I do for God? Tell people your story.
Yeah.
Tell people your story, period. If you, it doesn't matter if you have $1 to your name or anything, like if you have a story, because God is who he is, regardless of who you are. Right. And his story is true because ultimately it's his, right? Everything we do is for him. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. If somebody goes to church and you can take your pick from any of your own life experiences to say, hey, you know, I'm doing XYZ. I've been involved in it, whatever it is. Well, they go to church now. What is the church supposed to do? How should they respond?
I think that's a two-part answer. So there's a part for the way that the church should respond, and there's a part the way that us as believers should embrace coming to the gospel. I'm going to say to the person that is on the fringe of wanting to go to church, or they have church hurt, or they were disappointed by the church, or they're curious, but they might get a saying from a sibling like, "I thought you were going to catch fire the minute you stepped on the doorstep." That's literally what my brother told me. You're like, "You didn't catch fire." What? Yeah, right. Total class. He's got a humor. I mean, be a rebel. Be a rebel, because the enemy's job is to try to dilute the image and the power and the authority of the church. And is there broken people within ministry? Absolutely. Being a pastor is one of the hardest things to do. You work 90, 100-hour weeks sometimes, and sometimes you do it for no pay, and you do it for little recognition, to constantly be misunderstood. And so a lot of pastors go in with the best intent. However, there is a lot of broken people are healing broken people. And without Jesus at the center, there's a concern. So I think that, as for the person that's considering going to church and just wondering, like, know that you're probably going to have church hurt. I am a poster child example of church hurt. I was abused by someone in leadership, and they were protected by a higher class, and then they went and tried to ruin my relationship at a new church. I was misunderstood. I was told by a pastor that I greatly looked up to that I wasn't a Christian, and I had every reason to walk away from the church and give them a middle finger. But because I did not walk away from the church, I've continued to be edified. I've continued to be encouraged. And I can say that if you have a temptation to leave the church, it's probably because you're there, not for you, but for somebody else that's there. And there is something so powerful about worshiping with other believers. There's a saying, like, in the end times, everyone's ears will want to be tickled. And it's so easy to Google a sermon on, oh, I feel depressed right now. I'm going to Google a sermon on depression. Or I feel anxious. Let me just Google sermon on anxious. You're controlling what you think you need to hear from the Most High and from God. And God has already, if you're going to a church and you have a pastor and an eldership, people that are praying into what those messages need to be, when they need to be, God is giving them wisdom and what to say and when to say it, whether they realize it or not. So like when there's times you're going to go to church and it feels like your mail's being read and you haven't told anyone about what's going on, it's because God has given that pastor and that eldership and that body a word for you in the time you need it. And it may not tickle your ears, but it may be what you need to be encouraged and to be strengthened, and know that even if they disappoint you, that, I mean, even we just left a church recently because they wouldn't pray from the altar. They didn't offer like altar call prayers. They had multiple religions that were on leadership. They didn't value security. And one of the elders was a woman. Now, a lot of people may be frustrated with that. I wasn't opposed to a pastor being a woman. I wasn't opposed to the lead pastor being a woman because she was preaching alongside her husband, and I can debate that. But it was an issue when the elder was being like, I didn't even talk about this necessarily, but like the most recent elder, she was being accused of doing meth and sleeping with another congregant's husband, and the church turned a blind eye to it. And so I sent a really direct letter to the church about it and gave evidence to why I felt like I was qualified to speak on this. And then we left the church because, and I didn't make a scene about it, but it was one of those things like, you guys are not praying, you have no Bible studies, you have multiple religions. And if you walked into this church, you wouldn't think it. They did everything right. But as a Christian, like my job is to make sure that I'm holding the standard of Christ in my home, and I'm modeling that, and the standard of Christ is in the Gospels. And so if they're not praying, if the Holy Spirit is not there, it's okay to leave, and you don't need to necessarily make a huge conundrum over it. I would say people that are looking for churches, look for the fruit. If the church has been around for 20 years and it's not growing and there's not any sort of growth, there's a red flag. Something's bottlenecking it, whether it's in the spirit or it's in leadership. But I know some people want more intimate settings, and sometimes God does preserve those intimate settings for the people that need that. But there's usually fruit in some capacity or something. So just for the people that are searching for God, you don't necessarily, like my mom doesn't even, like she goes to the church that I used to be at. She serves in the church. She does not attend service on Sundays. She watches from her home because she doesn't feel ready to go into a church service because she struggles with anxiety. And so, but she reads her Bible. She watches the sermons online. She's made an effort to get in and serve the church. She tithes at the church. She finds community. She's in a small group. Like she's doing everything right. She just doesn't go to Sunday church service. But get in your Bible and find somebody else that's even 2 or 3 steps ahead of you that can walk with you in scripture, because they're going to answer things that other people won't. And then I would just say for the church, like bring the spirit back. There's a lot of churches that I've seen that you walk in and they're doing all the things and they're checking the boxes, but the Spirit of God's not there. I mean, you can say, yes, you can see that by testing your fruits, but you take that to God. And a lot of times there's, I mean, I've never ran a church, so I can't really like speak on that, but I have been into quite a few places that the Spirit of God's not there. There's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of being critical. And I know that there's a point of standing up and defending the truth. Like, here's an example: abortion. When the pro-choice movement was really big and everyone was talking about pro-life versus pro-choice, you had churches that stood on the pulpit that condemned all abortion, which is absolutely accurate. It is murder. Taking the life of a child's not okay. But there was so much raw in that movement. There wasn't grace for the women that said, I have an abortion, I have torment, I need help, because they were terrified to come through that they might be judged. And so there's this balance of grace and truth. And some churches do it really well and some churches don't do it really well. But providing places and groups, that even if I know a pastor, just to kind of like wrap this up, one thing that she did really well was she's like, I'm not a counselor. I'm a student, I'm a teacher, but I'm not a counselor. So the church will pay for you to go to counseling. You can go to counseling. And if you find a church like that, respect that. But as a church leadership, like you don't have to take it all on. We're a body, and not everyone's meant to be a hand, and not everyone's meant to be an ear. And so if I was to start a church, I would say the first thing I would do is bring brush fires in, because it was one of those, I kind of told you about it. It's at brushfires.group, and it's a course that is very intensive. I think the knockoff or the ripoff in the world of the enemy would be the Enneagram, because it just pigeons everyone into one hole. But like brush fires is like, so for example, my mission statement is to leave things better off than I found them, with an entrepreneurial spirit. My husband's is to encourage those in their giftings and fan the flame of what God has put in their life. And so for us, like that makes sense in the way that we do business and being in marketing and business coaching. And for other people, like finding out, why did God put you here? What are the works that he's pre-established for you? And what are those things? So like with brush fires, in order to love God and love my neighbor, I have to know who my neighbor is, and I can't know my neighbor if I know myself. And like a lot of what the Brushfires teachings is in order to understand myself, I have to understand my neighbor. And in order to like, so in a way that I've never seen any other assessment done it. And I've gone through years and years of that kind of stuff with my background in the mental health docket and whatnot. And so like with Brushfires, it helped me have grace with people that have different perspectives than me. Like if somebody has more of a maximizer and they like their routine and they like doing the same thing day in and day out, they are great general managers and they're great to keep something on. And those are the people you ideally want to be in the exact same position every Sunday at church. But in someone that's a high creative, they probably are, and they have a musical gift, they should probably be in the worship team. And those two personalities might butt heads because the creative person's all over the place and has a million ideas, and the maximizer person wants the same thing every day, every time, and do not like fringe on that. But they can't function without each other. And so it's easier to have grace in that area and to see someone's gifting and encourage them in what they have when you know what their design is. And so I think that's probably would be my wisdom to a church is find out what your congregation's design is, find out what your call is, and make sure that the Holy Spirit's evident. And then and Bible studies. There's so many churches that feel like country clubs. It's a glorified, we're going to come together and fellowship, but when you fellowship, no one talks about the Bible, no one is questioning each other, sharpening each other, or challenging each other's beliefs. And I've seen very few churches that I've been to where you can disagree agreeably. It's usually my way or the highway, and very rarely do you see a solid balance of them. And so for people that are entering the church, know that churches are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to find the right people. They're seeking counsel, but their jobs are really hard. And sometimes you might be the person there that they've been praying for. And if you let the enemy, let your church hurt get in the way or let you take you out of there, you're only letting the enemy win. And so be a rebel, stay in church, make sure your Bible's above the church and that your family doesn't have to be compromised in the process, and have fun. Like God's a God of celebration and joy, and it doesn't have to be boring. You don't need to sin to be having a lot of fun and be doing a lot of exciting things. And so yeah, I think that would be it. Just make sure you know your Bible. Like if you don't have anything, just make sure you have the Bible. So it's long. I didn't pre-think that answer. Sorry. So it's longer.
No, that's all right. Yeah, no, actually the one thing I was going to say, before we absolutely wrap
Yeah,
up,
fine.
I was considering when the pastor found out about the associate pastor or the pastor in training in you and that whole situation, and he goes, yeah, you're not a Christian anymore, or I don't view you as Christian. And I believe that pastor's wrong. But even if he were right, the Bible gives us really good instruction for what to do if we catch somebody in sin. First, we go to them, and if they don't agree with us, then we bring a second witness, very Old Testament, right? And if they still don't agree with us that they're doing something sinful, then we bring them in front of the elders, right? The body of elders. And if we still don't agree with them, then we ostracize them from the church and treat them as an unbeliever. But hold on a second. How should we treat unbelievers?
Not like that.
And so I want to be very clear with my own position on this, because I've heard like, oh, I got pregnant at 14, 15, 16, whatever. And then the church kicks me out. What? Where? Why? What is the rationale? And it's like, well, we can't have sin in the church. And it's like, well, hold on. The church is the place for sinful people. Like
Yeah.
this is, we don't need a doctor going around telling everybody how healthy they are. And if the church is the spiritual hospital, which somebody who I interviewed prior talked about this, they considered the church a spiritual hospital. And I love that idea, right? Because everybody will come in broken in some way. And we all need healing. And even if we had a week where we felt like we didn't sin one bit, I don't know what that looks like, but even if we have it and we go into church, even then, if I'm not needing the healing, I can still be a conduit for God to help someone else with their healing, right? The moment you're well enough to go out and do, then go out and do. But this whole idea of you caught somebody in a sin that you feel is worse than every other sin, or maybe it's a sin you're guilty of yourself and you just can't be around it because then you have to reckon with your own sinful nature. The answer is not to boot somebody. And even if you do, even if the church goes through the proper process, right? And they say, you know what, you're not welcome in the church because this unrepentant sin you have. Then again, it leads us to, but then you treat them as an unbeliever. And how are we towards unbelievers, right? We're sharing the love of Christ. We're showing them the gospel. And the idea is that I don't need somebody to tell me that I'm in sin. I can have that. And I've had people say, hey, what about this? What about that? But the real hope is that conviction will do its job, that the Holy Spirit will do his job and convict those, right? So even if you have to ostracize someone from the church, that doesn't mean that you stop interacting with them. That doesn't mean that you stop engaging with them, because they still were a life worthy of Jesus dying on the cross for, right? And so that I guess that's the last thing to say is, like, I condemn those type of actions. I am not in support of anything like, oh, somebody gets caught in a sin that I can't deal with or don't want to believe, so I'm going to protect the aggressor, to keep up the image of the church. The church should look like the most scarred, gnarly, broken, but beautiful because of Christ's redemption place I've ever been to. I don't need to go to a place for perfection, right? I don't need that, because Christ is my perfection. When I go to church, we're all working towards doing what we can do for God, trusting that we're keeping our eyes on him and doing it for him, whatever that looks like. And so personality and preference and taste and all the things that make us unique should not divide us when we're in unity in Christ, right? So all that to say, thank you so much for sharing your martyria, your testimony. I appreciate your time. And before we end, I know that you've written a book, and I know that you're very active on social media. So how would you encourage people to find you if they want to know more?
Oh, thank you for that. Just like touching on what you said, like I fully agree, and I'm thankful that you had me, and I've very much enjoyed talking to you. I'm actually probably going to see if I can come get you to tell me your testimony, because I love hearing them. But as far as places to see me, Kearsy Hoffman, KearsyHoffman.com, Kearsy Hoffman Instagram, TikTok. I'm just starting to be active on TikTok. Because I'm in business, I'm actually experimenting a little bit with what TikTok Shop is, but I'll probably pivot back to being talking about faith, talking about business. Faith and business are not things you often see together outside of Dave Ramsey, and so it'll be interesting to see how that changes on my platform, but those are the places you can see me. I'm starting a podcast that'll launch this November called Kingdom Calling, and it's equipping the saints for business, and so just anywhere that you want to see me or find me, you can find my email on the KearsyHoffman.com. I love answering questions. I love disagreeing agreeably. If you want to talk about something and be sharpened or try to sharpen me, like, you can come find me. The Holy Hookup is the book of mine and Colton's story. It has pictures. It has like pictures of this, pictures of our wedding. That's actually our wedding photo on the cover. And so if you want to know more about the story, that's on Amazon.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kearsy, so much for your time. Again, I appreciate you being on Martyria.
Thank you. We'll see you guys later. Thank you so much.